Hey there, I'm Joey from EDH Rec, and today I'd like to try something kind of fun. I've already done a whole video ranking my current decks, but this time I'd like to rank all of my older decks, the ones that I took apart. Apparently I'm such a big fan of reanimator strategies that I won't stop at just bringing back dead creatures, I also gotta bring back dead decks too. Basically, I'll go through my commander graveyard and discuss the decks that I no longer have, why I took them apart, how good they were, how much I played them, and whether I miss any of them. Quick clarity, I won't be counting things like precons, or decks that I borrowed, or stuff that I only brainstormed online. These have to be decks that I physically committed to building and playing in paper, and that eventually I took apart for one reason or another, whether I grew bored with them, or I needed those cards for a different deck, or I eventually grew out of that experience, etc. So please join me for a journey through some of my past EDH decks, and feel free to judge me for how awful some of these choices probably were. I hope you enjoy it, because I think there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from what we've left behind. Alright, let's get to it. My deck graveyard here, a bunch of different decks that I've taken apart over the years. Fun fact, there are 69 of them. Nice. Yeah, I want to go through some of these old decks that I used to have, the reasons why I took them apart, and just kind of rank them basically in terms of how fondly I look back on these experiences. And to lay some groundwork real quick before I get into actually just placing them anywhere, I do want to go over what does each of these tiers truly mean. So starting off in S tier, to kind of explain it, this is more of the I miss it so much, I miss it desperately category. I'm not going to rank just off of how powerful these decks were. I don't want to rank it off just of oh, did I learn good lessons from these decks? That's part of it, for sure. But an S tier really means I miss this deck so much. And in fact, there's a strong possibility I may even put a deck like that back together again. Or either some variation of that 99 might carry on into the decks that I build, the spirit of that deck, or even that exact commander could really come back into my current commander portfolio, as it will. So S tier is a deck that I want to replace or genuinely may put back together, because that's just how much I enjoyed it. And even though I did take it apart, it's the kind of thing that I always look back on and I'm just is that the one that got away? That's kind of S tier for me. So it's not just oh, this is a powerful deck, that's part of it, but it's also man, I miss it. A tier is also going to be yeah, I missed that too, but it's more about how much I learned from it. I got really, really good lessons from this deck, and not only that, but A tier is going to be, I recommend other people build a deck, either this type of commander or something quite like this. I think that I learned so much from it that it made me a better commander player, and I really do think that other people would benefit from trying out strategies like this if they haven't already. So it's a deck that I'm that's some good stuff. Maybe don't underrate them or don't overlook them. A tier is stuff that I'm there's no chance that I'm going to put those types of decks back together again necessarily. There would be S tier, there's definitely that chance. But A tier is you know what, I'm really glad that I did that, and I think other folks would be glad if they built that type of deck too. I think that you could learn a lot from them, because I definitely did. They make me these decks made me a better commander player, and I enjoyed them just that much. Moving down to B tier. B tier is more about the power. This is a dang good deck. This is a powerful deck. I do indeed look back on it with yeah, that was great. But there's no way that I'm gonna oh, I should put that back together. And it's not even necessarily the kind of thing that I'm you know what, you should try. It's not oh, you know what, you gotta build. That's not B tier, that's A tier. B is just this was powerful. This was a good deck. This is a solid piece of work. And it's cool that it's behind me now. So that's kind of where B tier is landing. Just that step below. I'm not people have got to try this one out. Then there's C tier. C tier is the bland tier a little bit. I don't miss it, is where C tier is going to land. C tier is yeah, it didn't make a huge impression. In fact, it might be the kind of decks that I'm oh, I forgot I had that. It's kind of where C tier lands, which feels a little bit mean, but in addition to it making not necessarily a huge positive impression, that also means that it didn't make a huge negative impression. It's not a deck that I look back on and regret. That is more for the D tier and the F tier. D tier is I should have dismantled it sooner. D tier is I kept this too long. I'm just yeah, okay, I guess I tried it, but I shouldn't have had it for as long as I did. And then F tier is full facepalm. That's what F tier is. F tier is I'm never looking back. Why did I even build that in the first place? So that is going to be the reason that certain decks will fall into any of these. S is oh, I might put that back together again. I really enjoyed it. A tier is I learned a lot from this, and I would say that other people should also maybe try a deck out like this. B tier is like, that was a powerful deck. I'm glad it's behind me, but like this was, you know, good piece of work. C tier was a minimal impression, neither positive nor a negative. D tier is like, I should have dismantled that sooner, and F tier is fully a facepalm. Why did I build it in the first place? So those are my tiers. That is why I will be ranking out the decks however they fall. Let's actually get to it now. Oh man. All right, we're starting off with Krufix, God of Horizons, a Simic value engine commander if ever there was one. Really hard to interact with, keeps all of your mana. Like, Krufix becoming a creature was a thing I never wanted to have happen, so I had very minimal board presence, and it was definitely a very controlling deck. I mean, I gotta be honest, I'm slamming it right into B tier because it was powerful. I'm not ever going to put a deck like this back together again. It's not like a thing I'm gonna recommend to other people, but man, was a powerful deck. That, like, this came out around the same time, like Prophet of Krufix. I had that in the deck too, and it definitely taught me how good Prophet of Krufix was. Like, the reason I built this deck in the first place was like, what, the second or third deck that I built, and it was because my then boyfriend, now husband, bought me a pack of Journey into Nyx, and I opened this. We were in a show together, and he gave it to me as like a closing party gift, I think, when the show closed. And I opened this and was like, well, this is kind of neat. Let's see if it's good. And it was. And I then tormented my playgroup with this crazy Simic deck for a while. I would bank like 200 mana in my mana pool because Krufix was holding on to it. And then I would just murderlate people by casting Blue Sun Zenith to force them to draw 200 cards, which was fun. It was pretty wild. Yeah, I got to put this in B tier. This is a powerful, powerful deck. But there's no way I'm ever putting something like that together again. Glad that it's part of my commander history, but yeah, just like, this was just a powerful piece of work. So good on your Krufix, but I'm glad that it's behind me. Shorakai is going to be next. This is a lot more recent in my commander playing career, actually. Shorakai. Ooh, where do I put this? The reason that I had a Shorakai deck wasn't because I wanted to do stuff with vehicles or even the combo stuff that Shorakai is now a lot more famous for. I built Shorakai as a reanimation deck where I would use Shorakai's innate ability to draw and discard cards. I would put a huge Angel into the graveyard or a huge Sphinx into the graveyard, and then I would use really odd, like, white reanimation spells like Breath of Life and cards like that to reanimate those things. So I was trying to do Reanimator, but not in black, basically, because I've been doing Reanimator ever since I got into Commander. I've been doing Reanimator since before Commander. Like, Reanimator is my favorite thing to do, and I wanted to try it out in a different color. As a result of that, though, I'm not sure where I'm going to put this, because, like, arguably, I'm glad that I tried it, and I would indeed recommend to others that they do something like Shorakai. Like, in the A tier is this, like, oh, I would recommend this type of deck to you, and I would indeed recommend the concept of take a strategy that you're familiar with, but see if you can force it to happen in a different color combination. And to that, I'm like, oh yeah, that is an A tier type of thing. But I don't know if I can say that Shorakai was an A tier execution of that concept. The novelty on this wore out really, really fast for me. I think I'm going to have to put this one in B tier as well as a result of that, because it was good. It was indeed a pretty good deck, but I don't think I necessarily learned a whole lot from that experience, and I don't think it was a great execution of that idea of, like, try out strategies you're familiar with in, you know, different colors. It was okay. I'm not mad that I built it, and I think generally I look back on it and I'm like, oh, this was a positive impression. But yeah, it's the kind of thing that I think I could do a little bit better, and maybe with a different type of strategy. Maybe that idea is something I might return to in the future, but it certainly won't be with this commander. But it was an interesting experience, so I'll respect it. That's a respectable B tier. Asmira is also going to be a similar experience. This one was an attempt at a Selesnya Aristocrats deck. And it wasn't good. I can't lie, it wasn't good. It's so much work for such a minimal payoff. You have to kill off so many of your own creatures for her to get some +1 counters. I mean, where am I putting you, Asmira? C or D? I'll give you a C. I'll give you a C tier. It wasn't great. There's so little to say about it, and that's what C tier means. That solidifies it. Like, maybe I didn't need to work quite so hard at it, which almost would land it in D tier. But, like, I tried it, and again, the concept of, like, you know, take something like Aristocrats and put it somewhere else, that's the kind of thing that I would love to explore, but I really tried to make it work for her, and the payoff just wasn't there. It's a very regrettable. I'm kind of sad about it. But I think, if anything, like, the C tier kind of disappoints me, because I'm just like, man, I really spent like so much time on this, but like C tier makes me feel like, was that a waste of time? I don't know. I think that I learned some stuff from it, but like my experiments with try out typical strategies in different colors, I think will take me in a lot of different directions in the future. They won't look like these executions will. Okay, moving on now. Now we got to get to this Pier and Toothy deck that I had in the past. This was actually a Simic Super Friends deck. So a lot of people build Pier and Toothy with their, focus on +1 counters, because Pier will amplify those counters. Toothy can also be such a good combo engine that like there are plenty of combo Pier and Toothy decks that you blink Toothy and you can draw basically your entire deck, and Toothy will refill depending on the blink spell that you use. It's like Pier and Toothy are wildly powerful, like irresponsibly designed powerful. Like Toothy just having a regular leaves the battlefield trigger, that was crazy powerful. This, as a Super Friends deck, I built it that way because Pier's ability actually works really, really well with Super Friends. There are a lot of cards that will amplify the counters that, like loyalty counters that your Planeswalkers will get, but they won't work when you activate the abilities. They'll, like, if an effect places counters, then they will double those, or they'll add extra counters for those, but they won't do that when you activate a cost, because that's not the same thing as an effect, and it's really thorny. Pier doesn't care. Pier was just straight up, if you were placing counters for basically any reason, I'm gonna give you a little bit more. And the fact that he would do that to Planeswalkers, even when you activated them, meant that like some of those Planeswalkers, they got close to ulting wildly fast. This is basically me saying that I have like 1 or 2 proliferations right there in my command zone. Toothy I almost never even cast in that deck. Pier was the star, because Pier would amplify every Planeswalker that I play. So, and like there's a Jace that is not good. It was like clowned on for being like not particularly great in Commander, but like with Pier, it would, after like a single activation, he was threatening to ult, and it was like, oh, that ult's actually pretty darn cool. So I think I'm gonna, as a result of it, I'm talking myself back into like, this was great. I'm gonna put this one to a B tier too, because it was quite a powerful and cool deck. And I'm glad that I, played around with Planeswalkers. The problem that I had with it, the ultimate reason that I took this deck apart, was because of the gulf between when I clearly established control of that game by ulting Planeswalkers, for instance, like how long it took between that moment and when I actually ended the game. It produced some longer game states that I was kind of like, okay, even I'm like, come on, wrap it up, dude. Like I want to actually like close this game out, but I'm a little bit too gradual. Even though I ulted some Planeswalkers pretty darn early, like this is a powerful engine, it still took me a while for the game to close out, and that made them not feel very exciting, so I lost interest in the deck as a result of that. But it was a pretty interesting piece of work, and I'm pretty happy with it. It was a cool experiment to try out, but there's definitely no way that I'm gonna build that kind of thing again. If I experiment with Planeswalkers, it will take a very different form than what that deck was. Next, Martin Stromgold, my mono red tokens guy. Easy S tier. I love. Martin is so dang cool. When you attack with stuff, however many other things are attacking, they're gonna get that much bigger. Mono red tokens all the way. I love this deck. I actively miss this deck. It's the kind of thing that I would totally be at risk of like putting this back together again. The reason that I took it apart was because I currently have a Thelyss black-white tokens deck, and the win conditions between those two decks are very, very similar. The game plan is basically almost exactly the same, of like, put 10 things on the battlefield and then slap either Martin himself, or in Thelyss's case, like a mirror entity into play, and then just swing with a bunch of things that are now huge, and you'll easily win the game with that, unless your opponents are doing crazy fog stuff. Yeah, it was great. I love it. Clearly I love it because I've got that same type of strategy in my Thelyss deck. A lot of people build Thelyss as aristocrats, but I'm just like, no, I just want bodies that go smash. And that's what I got from Martin. And I think it was great. The little trickiness that you have to play around with Martin, where people can see obviously what your game plan is going to be. And there's that like summoning sickness quirk that you have to work around. If you want it to be quick, you got to find a haste enabler in there somewhere. Like I like that. I like the challenge of this deck, but I didn't touch it for over a year because I was scratching that itch from a totally different deck. But man, I would love to take specifically Martin as a commander and see if I can't make him work again in a new, interesting way that is satisfying to me. So yeah, this is probably the kind of thing that'll be hovering around my currently alive decks for a while. Martin is like constantly threatening to get back into that group. I just have to find a way that I will make sure that I appreciate it and that I appreciate Thelyss at the same time, without them feeling like the win conditions are exactly the same and the games play out exactly the same. So I need to tinker more with that, but Martin, love you, easy S tier. Oh, by the way, quick interlude, if you're curious about any of these decks, we have a link in the description of every YouTube video that we do, which leads to a list of all of our current deck lists. And in my section, there also is a place for all of my retired deck lists as well. Not all of my old decks will be there. There are many that have just been straight up lost to time, but several of them are there in case you wanted to look through any of them. And also real quick, while I'm paused here, I want to let you know that YouTube has allowed me to imbue the like and subscribe buttons with the power to Heart of the Cards top deck exactly the spell that you need at exactly the time you need it in your next game. So make sure you do that, because you don't want to miss out on that benefit. And by the way, I really encourage all of you to try out an exercise like this one too, because I've found it really enlightening, and it's really helped me appreciate the decks I currently have even more. Let me know which decks that you used to have and where they might fall. I'm really curious to see if people share any of my experiences with those lists, or if there are any commonalities across the decks that people have taken apart. Maybe something I could do as a follow-up video in the future. I don't know. But anyway, let's resume. Moving on now to Lazav and Regziel, which I will evaluate as a pair because I flipped back and forth between these two as the leader of a deck for a long time. I don't have the greatest things to say about these, unfortunately. I'm not mad about them. They're not F tier, but I was trying really hard to make these work in ways that they don't necessarily always work. And they had different restrictions. You know, Lazav obviously will become a copy of other stuff when you mill your opponents, or when their stuff dies. Regziel is trying to steal spells, and it's got good evasion, you know, with the Island Walk and Swamp Walk to try and steal those spells. And stealing a spell is really interesting, and I think as a result of that, I'm going to put Regziel one tier higher than Lazav. Lazav's timing was always just so weird, because like, even though Regziel is 6 mana, and that's also a kind of a decent hurdle for Regziel to work, even though Regziel is 6 mana, you know, you can play some stuff that fills up a graveyard, or just let a little bit of the game progress before Regziel even arrives, and the stage is set. And you're like, cool, there, I know who I might want to attack to try and steal some cool spells. Whereas Lazav, you've got to get Lazav out early before you start doing stuff. And that's a weird restriction on timing, especially because Reanimator, if you want to get a cool creature from your opponent's graveyard, it's already so easy to just like mill people for a couple of cards and then cast a simple reanimation spell and get that thing back. And the hexproof that Lazav has and the potential for commander damage that it has, those are ways to play around with it. But man, it wasn't a tempo that I appreciated, and frankly, with both of these, the risk again becomes I'm filling my opponent's graveyard, which means they could Mizzix's Mastery or Eternal Witness back good stuff at any time. So like, there's a huge risk involved with playing commanders like these. So especially when you're not trying to like actually, the strategy isn't just to mill them out, which is the other thing that these kind of do. It's just like, am I fully committing to I want them to have 0 cards left in their deck, or am I just trying to use their graveyard a little bit? And so it was always very, very awkward for that reason. So yeah, Lazav I'm going to put in D tier because I should have dismantled it sooner. Whereas Regziel I'll give a C tier, because it just was a nothing burger of a deck. I still like the idea, stealing spells from my opponents. That's still very enchanting for sure. Enchanting more than just what Lazav was trying to do of like becoming stuff. I just don't think that lined up very well, and I've found ways to abuse my opponent's graveyards in other commanders that I currently have alive today. But yeah, I can't say that my experiments with either of those were particularly successful, and so as a result, they've got to go into kind of either a bland or a slightly disappointing category, which is a shame. Which is a shame, but it's just the reality of it. Those were very early decks for me as well. Maybe the like 4th, 5th, 6th, like very early commanders that I was trying out, but they were hard to make work, and I think they still would be pretty hard to make work as well. Okay, moving now to Geth. Geth gets the F. I feel bad, but I cannot be alone in this, right? I feel like a lot of people early on in Commander were trying out Geth, who will like steal stuff from your opponents and fill their graveyard even more, which is again a little bit of a liability depending on whose graveyard you're filling. And it gets back the stuff tapped, and it was kind of awkward to try and draw this line between like, am I using their stuff or am I trying to mill them out? Is this a big mana deck? Do I have other big mana payoffs, or am I all in on Geth? And the fact that he's 6 mana to begin with as well, like this is a cool, like that art is metal as boss. I really like Geth in theory, but in terms of execution, it's like, why did I keep trying to make this work? It was not working, and there's no way. I'm just like, I look back on that and I'm like, why did I, for so long? So like, sorry Geth, you're getting my first F tier, but I don't I don't think you were good for me. I think that if I could go back in time and tell a younger Joey, hey, give up on this, I think that would have been better for younger Joey to not spend that much time on Geth, which is it's a shame. It's a shame. I like it a lot, but it wasn't working ever the way that I wanted it to. Geth eventually, that mono black list that I had there, eventually became Drana, Liberator of Malakir, Drainer of Malakir. I forget the exact name here. There have been a couple of different Dranas. And I like her. I like her a lot more. She's probably going to go more into the... I can't say that she's a D tier. She's going to go into more of the the neutral type of zone with the C tier, because this was a happy place to find for that big mana stuff that mono black can do. And that's really what I was after with Geth, which maybe, that's my failing with Geth. I was trying to force him to do something that wasn't necessarily quite as appropriate for what he could do. And when I moved over to Drana, where she's got that activated ability that you can basically always use to pick off someone's creature and then boost her up and get a little bit of flying commander damage in there, that was a great time. And it felt like such a great place to put a Cabal Coffers package. And that was really what I was after when it came to mono black. I wanted something that was going to be fun with, where's a place that I can put a whole bunch of mana that I know this color combination, that I know mono black is capable of producing. And that was cool, and I'm glad that I had it for a while. But eventually she turned into my Sir Conrad list that I now have, which is also a great place to put a whole bunch of mana into his activated ability. And it's doing a little bit more of that graveyard stuff that I cannot possibly resist. And that just eventually Conrad has been, a little bit more of a whoa kind of thing, and it ain't fooling around, and I've enjoyed that a little bit more than I ever necessarily enjoyed Drana. I am mad about her. I mean, it's cool. I'm glad that I had it. But she didn't really wow me at any point necessarily either. So that's why I'm going to have to put her into C tier. And I'm glad that that mono black package has now eventually turned into my Conrad list, which is doing a whole lot of other stuff that feels both honoring the big mana thing that I was always after, and can produce a couple of other creative plays that people don't the damage that Conrad can do is absolutely unreasonable, and that just feels like it really does the mono black thing in the way that I actually always wanted to. So yeah, Drana's gonna land in C tier for all of that stuff. She was good. She was cool. It was neat, but I've just found other things to do since that point. So it's all right, cool, I salute you, Drana. Okay, moving on now to Teferi, the mono blue Teferi, the Planeswalker one from, I want to say, Commander 2014, and around that time I did indeed have a Teferi deck. I tried it out. I even tried out the Chainveil combo with it for a little while. And it's also probably going to go into C tier. C for the Chainveil combo. It just didn't make much of an impression on me either. I think I was just trying out for Planeswalkers as commanders. This is new, and back when those decks came out. And so I just wanted to try it. I just wanted to see it. And I think it was okay. It was exactly okay. It was powerful. When I started trying out the combo version of it, and for the power of it, I could almost put it into B tier. But in terms of did I like it? I don't think I did. I don't think I disliked it either. Probably the thing that it was conflicting with was I still around that time had the Crewfix deck that was already doing big mana stuff too, in blue colors. So I think it's just kind of yeah, I guess I tried that, but it's not like I regret trying it, and it's not like I'm glad I tried it either. So it was there. It was a deck that I played for a while, and that certainly was an experience that I had. Of all the decks that I've had, that was one of them. It's kind of that feeling. It's very, very neutral. And I'm happier to see other versions of Teferi that we've gotten since then. Although I understand he's probably still pretty good and competitive as a combo deck. Maybe. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, C for Chainveil, I guess. It certainly was a deck. All right, now we are on to Kaneos Intiro, my group hug kings. Easy A tier. This is what A tier was made for me. This was definitely a group hug deck. I was inspired by the 2016 precon that these guys came in, and I built a deck and expanded it from there. And this is probably the deck that I've learned the most from throughout my entire Commander playing career. This was such a terrific piece of work. I loved playing it. The reason that I did eventually take this deck apart was because, like so many group hug decks, it is fundamentally kind of a control strategy. You are giving other people stuff, but you're also you have to keep them in check. And so as a result of that, the games went pretty long. I definitely had some 15, 16 hour and a half long games with this deck, and that was a little bit longer than I wanted those games to go. It got a little bit grating, but the stuff that this taught me about Commander, about multiplayer dynamics, about paying attention to what does that person need, can I provide it? Do they need mana? Do they require a little bit more card advantage? What do I give away without asking anything? What things do I ask for favors in order to give in the first place? That was, and not even just that, also paying attention to, oh, they might be about to go off, or like she's probably got another turn before she really starts to cook, and like how can I take advantage of that? Whose board do I want to be big so that maybe I can make use of that? I'm going to like steal some of their creatures, Reigns of Power, Mob Rule, any of those types of effects. I learned so much from this deck. It is probably the single deck that has taught me the most, and like even with the decks that I currently have around today that I love so much, this is the deck that I think fundamentally made me a better Commander player, and I would absolutely recommend a group hug strategy to other players if you haven't had it before, because it's such a unique thing that can only exist in multiplayer Magic. You can't do group hug in a one-on-one game, so you gotta give this a try, because I think it will help you go from having a view of like how do I make my own strategy work, and it will help you see the game from a bird's eye perspective to understand what the flow or the dynamic or the tempo of the game overall is like. It's such a zoom out, really, I don't want to say transcendental experience, but like it was a dang good experience for me to have that made me better at playing every other deck that I owned. It just also made some games go a little bit long, which is why I took it apart. So there's no chance that I'm putting that deck together again. I can't put it into S tier for that, but in terms of decks that made me better, A tier. Easy A tier. And we're going to hop from A tier to an F tier, which probably sounds mean for those who love Mael, but please allow me a moment to explain myself. This was not a proper Mael the Anima deck. This was a deck that I called Titania because it was actually a secret Commander Titania deck in Naya colors. Titania is one of my favorite legends. I think, period. I think that's the end of that sentence. Like, it's one of my favorite legends ever. It's some of the best art by Magaldi. Oh, I love Titania so much. And the reason that this is going to F tier is because I should not have tried to bother with doing this whole secret commander business. I think that the time I built this was a very early deck. This was around the time that like secret commander was more of a thing, that it was kind of in the heyday, more of a fad, maybe might be the way. Like, you know, you'd have the actual commander that you want to play with in the deck and you would tutor it out, but you'd have a different commander in the zone to give you color access to other stuff that you wanted to do. And the thing I was trying to do here is not something I'm proud of. I would try to get Titania into play and then cast like an Armageddon, destroy all lands, and then as a result of that, Titania leaves me behind with a board full of 5/3. Then no one else can do anything. Like, that was the game plan. And Mael was there to like maybe help find Titania a little bit, but like she barely mattered. I was just trying to tutor out Titania and then cast some type of, you know, way to destroy all the land. Then only I have a board. Wahahaha. I should have just built a Titania deck, and eventually I did. Like, just this. Why did I? This makes me facepalm a little bit. I'm just like, I didn't need to bother with all of this gaff and this foolishness. If the thing that I like is Titania, just build Titania. And additionally, this deck has, I think, informed a lot of my thoughts on like how mass land destruction both is received and how it can be used. Because in this deck, I was doing exactly what a lot of people who advocate for mass land destruction will say to do, where if you're going to play it, make sure that you can win the game basically immediately once you do. And indeed, when everyone's lands are gone, but Titania has left behind a bunch of elementals for you because she saw your lands die too, that sounds like the kind of thing where like, sweet, I'd just be able to clean up the game right then and there, right? Yeah, except people have removal. Except in response to that Armageddon, people remove the Titania, or they protect their own stuff. You know, heroic intervention kind of things exist. Or, like, there are plenty of other instant speed things that get rid of more than just one creature on your board. So, in my experience, even when people do try to execute on that plan of, yeah, I'll destroy all of the lands and then I have definitely a board-winning state, other people can still be like, all right, well, I'm actually going to remove your board that would be lethal before all the lands are destroyed. And then the game is just dragged on for several more turns, and it kind of like takes the air out of that game. So yeah, I can't say that I'm necessarily like, oh yeah, that was a cool deck. It wasn't. I don't think I should have faffed around with it. I think I should have just like been honest and gone like, all right, cool, let's go for a Titania deck. And indeed I did. And now I do have a Titania deck, and she's probably one of my most powerful decks that I own. She is crazy cool, but I definitely was doing myself a disservice by distracting myself with this whole other business of like secret commander stuff. It wasn't productive, and I'm glad that I just had the actual thing that I was trying to build around instead. All right, moving from that to Carador, also one of my earlier decks. I think I've probably told this story before. Carador was, I originally got into Commander through the 2011 precons. I knew a couple of friends who were like trying Commander before Wizards fully endorsed it and started making the Commander precon products, but I fully got into it with those 2011 decks. But I actually originally bought the Gave deck, which had Carador in it, because I saw Carador and I love graveyards. I didn't actually end up playing that deck, though. As we were unboxing it, me and a buddy who'd also gotten one of the decks, he had gotten the Mimeoplasm deck, and he was like, oh, this is a lot more graveyardy than I wanted. And I was realizing, oh, this Gave deck is a lot more tokeny than I wanted. And we just swapped straight across. And both of us loved that. Like, Gave became one of his signature decks, if not still his signature deck, and Mimeoplasm is my T-Rex boy. That's my favorite. But after that point, I did try going back to Carador to see, what could I do? You know, how much fun would this actually be? And Carador is a very powerful commander. Like, absolutely very, very powerful. But I've got to put this into D tier. I've got to put this into F tier. I'm sort of talking myself into F tier right now with this, which is no commentary on how powerful of a commander Carador was. But Carador was not right for me. The reason that I like Reanimator, the things that I love about Reanimator as a concept, as a deck archetype, the thing that I love so much about it is that I don't have to pay the mana cost. And Carador is great, but Carador asks you to pay those mana costs again. And that makes Carador very efficient at like getting back, 1 drops, 2 drops, 3 drops, 4 drops kind of thing. But I like to pay 2 mana for a thing that cost 8 mana. That's my vibe. So for me, I'm like, why did I even bother with Carador? I knew starting off that it was not going to be the thing that I would like. And I gave it a shot, I gave it the good old college try, as you might say, but it wasn't right for me. It is powerful, sure, but I didn't enjoy it because that's just not what I'm after. So like Carador, no disrespect on your name, powerful commander, but I was barking up the wrong tree. And so that reflects on my journey with the deck. And Carador, it's either a D or an F. I'm going to put it into F because I don't think that I should have bothered with doing it. So it's not quite a facepalm, but it is just like, this wasn't right. Okay, gonna move from Carador to another early thing that I tried out was Voltron with Ural the Mist Stalker, who's still really good. I think if I put this deck together again, like, it's not like Ural's gotten worse, right? Where do I put this? Is this C tier? Ural the Mist Stalker got so big. Like, it was very easy to Voltron people down, but obviously it has a very apparent weakness of just like, all right, cool, watch out for anything that's going to make you sacrifice your creatures. But that was fun to shore up as well. You know what? Okay, so looking over a lot of the other decks that I've built, like aside from you here, maybe Feather if you want, it was more Spellslinger, but like aside from a small handful, maybe Eleonora as well, this is one of my only experiences with Voltron overall, where like it became very, I think like Ural was the first time I ever tried Voltron, like commander damage matters, all eggs in one basket, make my commander the most important piece on my battlefield. And I think I gotta say, as a result of that, it taught me a lot. So that's gotta bump it up. I don't know if I can quite put it into A tier because I don't think that like what I learned from playing that Voltron experience was hugely conscious. I think it was more of a subconscious, like I've learned from playing this that Voltron is not my style. I respect the style, and I'm glad to play against it. Like my mom has a Voltron deck, she's played Dragon Lord Ojutai, or my stepdad, he's got a Karlov deck that will definitely clock you with a bunch of commander damage. A bunch of my buddies have played around with Voltron stuff, so like I know to be afraid of it when it's there. Yeah, I've also got that as a Voltron was also there. I have not revisited a whole lot. I think there are only maybe 4 Voltron decks that I've played throughout here, or at least where explicitly like commander damage was definitely the thing I was angling for. It's either B or C. I think I'm going to put it into B tier, and the reason why is because like when I was describing C tier, I said that it made like a minimal impression. I think what Ural did for me was make a subconscious impression about like it taught me stuff about what I don't like about the game, but that's still a valuable lesson, and I am glad that I learned that decently early on, so that could help direct me towards the stuff that I would enjoy more. I think having practiced stuff with Ural taught me to avoid other stuff that I wouldn't enjoy as much in the future. It taught me what I would indeed look for in a Voltron strategy, but it wasn't the kind of thing that I'm like, you gotta try Ural. I don't think you gotta try Ural. I think it's healthy to try out Voltron, but Voltron can take so many different forms, even just with equipment stuff or a whole bunch of other things, that I'm not gonna put it quite into A tier, but it's a thing that I'm like, this made sense as part of my commander career to have tried out. Okay, we go now to Audric. Audric, the keyword ability sharer amongst all of your creatures. If one of your creatures has first strike, they all do. If one of them has lifelink, they all do. Easy, Easy placement into S tier. What a dreamboat of a commander. What a cool idea. What a great design to examine what mono white is good at. It feels so flavorful. It feels so fun. This is great. The reason that I took it apart was because it often produced the type of experience where either I slammed the door on that game pretty dang quickly, or I did garbage at all that game. It was one or the other and never any in between, which was a deeply inconsistent experience. And so I started to feel pretty weird about like either handily winning or not contributing at all. And that was a very odd thing to a weird energy to be in, because in both cases it can have kind of an odd effect on the way that that game plays out in ways that other people may not even enjoy. Not even just how but like when I am not doing anything in the game, other people might feel weird about that game too, you know? Like it just started to feel a little bit weird, but I don't think that would be the case if I put that deck together again today. And that's why it's an S tier, because I might put it back together again today. It's such a cool idea. And back when I had built it was back in, the actual Shadows of Innistrad block, well before Wizards of the Coast had figured out what it is that they want to do with mono white in multiplayer. And now it has a lot more tools that I think would allow the deck to establish more of that consistency, to be a bit more slow and steady wins the race, rather than being like either this all out, you've slammed the game, the door on the game, or this like nothing burger of a deck. So yeah, I miss this one. I actively miss Audric, just like I actively miss Martin. And Audric does have a little bit more uniqueness compared to some of the other stuff that I built, that it could be very, very possible that like in the next coming year, I try Audric out again and I see how I feel about it. Yeah, just truly a really, really cool deck, and I think it does mono white the way that I want mono white to be done. Yes, it's focused around combat, but it's so interesting, and it's the kind of thing that you're only going to see here. Like it's such a novel design that I'm just very impressed by the like what that deck can do. I'm very impressed by the design of that deck, and if I'm gonna build mono white again, which I want to do, it's probably going to have some type of elements that Audric inspired in me. So yeah, totally an S tier. Going from Audric to Yidris. Ooh boy. D tier? Yidris is not a deck I'm necessarily proud of the way that Yidris is so powerful. That Cascade ability is crazy powerful. The reason that I'm a little bit like shaky on it, a little bit weird about it, is because this actually was another deck, sort of like the Ural, that I built Yidris as a Voltron deck. And that was kind of a way that I excused myself for its power, because we know that Yidris can be a ridiculously, insanely powerful combo engine, right? And I wasn't doing that. I was building Yidris in a Voltron way, which is, totally different. Like you're hamstringing yourself in a certain way, yeah? And that's kind of a thing that I rationalized to myself as a reason to keep it around for longer than I should have. And D tier is I should have dismantled this deck sooner tier. Because just with that cascade effect, when you double strike and you get multiple cascades off this stuff, like I took up so much of the chess clock. Playing this deck against my mom was embarrassing for me, like it was just like very much like, what am I doing here? Who am I impressing? This is a lot. This is a lot. And I need to like sense how the wind is going, and like see that not everyone else is enjoying this. So like if your group is down for the Yidris experience, Yidris is a cool deck, but I was not in those groups, obviously. And so I should have not messed around with Yidris for as long as I did. Easy D tier. Ooh, okay, Inala is next. This is one that I tried to make her work for a while. This was also a little bit of a Secret Commander-esque kind of ability, specifically because I was actually doing Inala Conspiracy, or Inala Arcane Adaptation. Basically, I wanted the deck to be full of things that are not wizards, that Inala would still allow me to double up. So like Grave Titans, but I would have a thing like an Arcane Adaptation in play that would turn all of my stuff into wizards, and then I could have multiple ETB effects from all those things that are not actually wizards. The problem is that it just didn't do a whole lot of anything, and you had to play so many tutors to even find a conspiracy thing, and then it was just like, cool, a single piece of removal and your entire deck does nothing. It's either a C or a D. I'm gonna put it into a C tier. It was a very placid experience. Like it sure was a step, but like it was a lot of hoops. to try and make it work. It was a cute experience. Like once, if it did work, it was kind of nice. It was cute. Like people are like, oh, that's cool. So we'll give it C for the, oh, that's cool. But it certainly was not powerful. And I can't say it made a negative impression on me. It was kind of like am I spinning my wheels for a whole lot of nonsense? I think I kind of am. And so that was a lesson that I had to learn. And as a result of that, it's going to just go, pretty middle of the pack. This was a pretty generic experience, unfortunately, which like you don't want that from a deck that feels like it should be that clever, right? Like when I describe it, I'm like, oh, that concept sounds really cool. In Nala Conspiracy, all of these non-wizards are wizards. It sounds like it should be neat, but the experience didn't quite match up to that. And so it's kind of a little bit disappointing, but not necessarily a negative thing. So I can't put it any lower than C. Okay, Arjun is going to be next. This was my attempt to recreate my my Niv Mizzet Izzet stuff that I was playing well before Commander. Back when I was playing in the original Ravnica block and Guild Pact came out, I definitely had an Izzet deck that was using Mind Moil effects. And Arjun was my attempt to recreate that nonsense. And that sure was an experience. That's sure was a deck that I made. It was, again, another one of those things of like I'm spinning my wheels, literally wheeling my entire hand for very little payoff, unfortunately. I think that there are lots of cool Arjun decks today, but at the time that I was building it back in, goodness, 2015, maybe I tried it in 2016, I can't entirely recall. I was not fit for it. Like it wasn't quite the energy that I needed, and it was a lot of like, I'm not doing anything to this game, and my hand is just changing a lot. And so I would say that overall, instead of it being kind of a nothing impression, it was a little bit like, who was I kidding? This wasn't working. If I were to revisit that kind of concept in the future, it would take a very different form, I think. Okay, we've got a trio here, just a stripe of landfall decks that are all very, very related. I've actually done a video on this channel about my relationship to these decks. So when I did eventually get around to building a Titania deck, I had her for a while. And then I also moved her over from Titania to Omnath when Omnath came out, and to Gitrog because I like graveyards, and also to Lord of Windgrace to try and combine all of them. And then eventually Korvold came out, and I was like, oh, Korvold would be better for me doing all this land sacrificey graveyard stuff than Windgrace would. And that made me really reevaluate what is it that I'm actually after here? Why am I trying to chase all of these things? And in fact, at that time, my Windgrace deck was like 2 red cards in the 99 and just a lot of green and a little bit of black, and so it was like I've lost sight of the thing I'm actually here for, and I just went right back to a Titania deck. And if you want to check out that video, it's a fun video that goes over that journey in a little bit more detail. But all 3 of these decks, although they shared certain amounts of the same idea, dual landfall stuff, I definitely have different feelings about each one of them. Omnath was a supremely generic experience for me. Omnath is actually, like, I built my cousin an Omnath deck. I'm absolutely going to say that, like, this is the kind of commander that, like, is very appealing, very cool for new players to get into the game. Like, my cousin, she loves her Omnath, like, flicking jelly beans at people. Are you kidding? She loves it. So, like, I would put the commander as a concept, like, way high. But in terms of my deck, I was kind of like, when I moved from Titania to Omnath, yeah, it was powerful, but I was so eager to move away from it when another option came up, and that's how I felt about Gitrog. Gitrog, though. Gitrog was real good. Gitrog was too good. Gitrog is, I'm going to put it in the B tier as a give some respect to the power of it, but like this was definitely the kind of deck that blinded me to how much of a negative effect I might sometimes have on the rest of the players. Sort of like Yidris a little bit. Like I could actually justify putting it into D tier for the experience that it caused other people to have. I was having so much fun with the stupid broken stuff that Gitrog can do that I definitely allowed that to blind myself to how my decks impact other people, which I'm not proud of. It took me a while to learn that lesson. But in terms of like how good that deck is, I can't say that the Gitrog belongs down lower. Like I needed to learn that. I think I needed to go through that type of experience. And whereas I don't think that I needed to go through the Yidris experience. Like Yidris, I should have taken apart sooner. And Gitrog, I should have also not taken apart sooner, but I should have tempered it sooner. I should have realized the effect that it was having. But it was doing stuff that I still like. And the stuff that Gitrog is doing is stuff that I now continue to do in my favorite deck, Babala Saga. Like playing with lands coming in and out of the graveyard is fun. And the fact that this was so good at it, yeah, I'm going to give that to the B tier. And Windgrace I'm going to give into the A tier. Because Windgrace, did what I think that my Gitrog deck should have tried to do, although maybe Gitrog never can do. Gitrog is so crazy powerful. But Windgrace tempered it a lot more nicely. Like, Landfall is still a very powerful strategy, but and Windgrace is still a very powerful commander. But Windgrace, my approach to that was such a different step from what Gitrog could do that it felt a lot more, I guess, appropriate. It felt more like the tempo of game that I actually want to play. And not only that, but I do think that everyone should have at least one landfall experience when it comes to Commander, and I think Windgrace is a really great candidate for that type of deck. Or if you want to be a little bit more straightforward, some 2-color stuff like Omnath are a great candidate. Like, especially if you're new to landfall, something as powerful and exciting as Omnath is great, but Windgrace had a lot more texture to it in the way that I just adore in a game. So yeah, I learned a lot from playing landfall as a result of Windgrace. A tier for sure. Then we have Marika Am I going to retake that? Then we have Marika Barrett, who I promise I was able to pronounce her name correctly on the first attempt. Marika was my attempt to get into Esper before I had a Yannette deck, which I much prefer. That, like, I just knew that I liked those colors. I wanted something that felt like the Esper colors are philosophically colors that I really strongly identify with. Like, Golgari is my favorite to play, but in terms of like the philosophies that each of those colors espouse, Esper lines up with me. So I was hunting for an Esper deck, but Marika just stealing other people's stuff and then killing it, like, it's cool, but it's just a removal thing in the command zone, and it really harshed the buzz of a lot of the games that I played. So I can't say that I'm looking back fondly on it. I had it for like maybe 3 games. But it wasn't doing what I wanted it to do, because people would be very careful about when they even play something that she could steal, and it put such a target on myself that I was not getting the experience that I wanted from it, and my opponents were changing the way that they very quickly changed their approach to that game whenever I would try to play this one. So yeah, it just wasn't great. I'm not saying that it's ridiculous that I ever tried building it, but it had such a strange effect on the game, and I didn't get what I wanted from it, that I don't think I should have kept it around for as long as it did, even though I didn't keep it around for very, very long. But I definitely spent a lot of energy on it, and that was probably a little bit of like I could have moved on a little bit more quickly. So Marika is going to be a slightly negative impression, just because the way that she affects a game so strongly was not the type of game that I typically enjoy playing. So she's going to go down into D tier, and I'm much happier with the different Esper deck that I have nowadays. Mathis and Edgar Markov both came in that 2017 Vampires deck. Mathis, I tried out first, I think. It's a little bit fuzzy for me. Yeah, I wanted to do some bounty stuff. I wanted to try a little bit of like, oh, can we get along? It was a nothing burger of a deck. This is a C tier. This is like, yeah, okay. It sure was a deck that I built, but even when the commander rules the death rules changed around, that made Mathis a little bit more strong, that you could put bounty counters onto your opponent's stuff. Yeah, that was cute. But has made almost no impression on me. Like, I genuinely forgot for a little while when I was putting notes for this video together. I genuinely forgot that I had a Mathis deck. So yeah, it's a blandly C tier. And then we have Edgar, whose power, I've got to spot him into the B tier as well. And not because, like, again, Yidris, I regret keeping it as long as I did. Edgar Markov, I don't regret keeping it as long as I did. But dang, was it powerful. Powerful enough that, like, could I put it into a higher tier? Maybe, if I was judging on power. But, like, I'm not at risk of putting this deck together again. And it's certainly, I can't put it into A tier, because I don't think it's the kind of deck that people need to play either. In fact, I think that Edgar is so wild that it's the kind of deck that maybe you should get away from faster than normal, as a matter of fact. But like, yeah, it was a solid deck. And not only was it a solid deck, I liked the tuning process of it, and I liked finding pieces like Mercadia's Downfall, like interesting boosts that not everyone was playing at the time, that I think are in fact very, very powerful. And so in addition to it being like just obviously a busted commander, so good that it makes a lot of people think that Eminence itself should just never be revisited, which I understand that argument because of stuff like Edgar. But like, in addition to doing that, finding ways to tinker and tune and abuse it from there. There's a reason I had this deck. There's a reason it's appealing. There's also a reason that I moved away from it, but I feel like a better Commander player as a result of the experiences that I had with it. And so sometimes tasting a little bit of that power, the way I did with Gitrog, the way I did with Edgar, sometimes it's good for you, but it's also good to move away. Okay, going now to Mazarek. And you know what? Kind of paired with this is Marin. When the 2015 Marin precons came out, when the experience precon stuff came out, I was more attracted to building Mazarek than I was to Marin. because I like the idea of like, oh, sacrifice my stuff, get benefit. That's like my favorite thing in all of Commander. But Mazarek as such an obvious win condition in the command zone, I just couldn't make it work without everyone thinking that I was going to be doing persist combo stuff. So Mazarek, it didn't work out. I did revisit Mazarek years and years later. I had it for a while during, I want to say either 2020 or 2021, that I built Mazarek again just with some of my favorite cards, just with some of my favorite things, like whatever that enchantment is that will give you a food, a clue, and a treasure if you've cast both a creature and a non-creature in the same turn. Like just a bunch of those kind of silly things. Like I did build that deck with just like cards that I like, and that was nice. But it still wasn't right, if that makes any sense. So Mazarek is going probably into D tier. I think in both cases, I was trying to make it something that it couldn't actually be. And again, everyone just assumes that you're doing persist combo stuff with Mazarek because of, and like granted, you can say it's like, no, it's not that. It's just even a list of some of my favorite cards. But even then, it's just like, I took apart the just my favorite spells deck version of Mazarek, because even though it was all of just my favorite stuff, even just the stuff like Cartographer, just cards that I like the art, I like whatever, even then it still wasn't delivering. And so I was like, I think I'm trying to make something work here, and really I should just focus on a different type of thing. And eventually Baba the Saga came out, and I love her, and that's satisfied. It scratched every one of those itches, you know? And then we got Marin. Ooh boy, Marin was for a long time my signature deck before I eventually, you know, Baba came out and I swapped over my Marin deck to Baba the Saga officially. There's no risk of me putting her back together again. The problem that I ran into with Marin, the reason that I was honestly for a year or two there eager to replace her, was because the game plan of Marin is just find a piece of removal and loop it. You know, a Plague Crafter to make everyone sacrifice all their stuff, a Reclamation Sage to just like continually destroy people's things, a Spore Frog so no one can kill you. When your commander is just an engine to get back pieces of removal, it's not producing the most interesting game in the world. So yeah, it was something I was eager to move away from after a while there. With that said, I mean, obviously, in terms of just its power, B tier. Do I put it into A? Do I put it into A tier just because of how long I had it? I think that's kind of a thing. Like, I didn't even have Crewfix for as long as I had Marin. I had Marin for years and years, and I think it's a little bit disingenuous of me to try and pretend that that didn't mean anything. I'm pretty sure I've got to put Marin into A just because of, like, yeah, I had this for a while, and A, I did kind of say, like, I would recommend it to other people. I'm not sure if I necessarily, like, need to recommend Marin to other people, but in terms of, like, what I learned from it, like, if that's a quality for it to be into A tier, is just like, did this help me improve as a commander player? Yeah, yes, of course it did. Like, yeah, there's no, like, so much of my commander experience was shaped by her presence. Like, she definitely made me better at commander. She's been around for so much of my commander playing career. Yeah, she's going into A tier. I can't disrespect her by putting her lower than that. She was a huge part of my commander experience, so categorically, this made me better at commander. She's got to go into A. Okay, moving from there to Vishkal. Vishkal is one of those decks that I wish I could make work. 7 mana is tough. It doesn't make me facepalm, but it didn't work, and I was definitely barking up that tree for longer than I really needed to. I still want to. Vishkal is just an idea that I'm very enchanted by, but it's really only okay. And that's a shame. I think it's cool. I think it's an interesting piece of design, and I hope that maybe in the future we can see some designs that encourage us to play more of those really expensive commanders and make them a little bit more viable than currently Vishkal is necessarily. I mean, paying 9 mana to cast them again, that game's over before you get to that point. It's a tough hill to climb, but I still just like the idea a lot, and I liked the idea so much that I tried to make it work for longer than it really could. So sorry, Vishkal, you're a D. Okay, Duke Older, and kind of related to this was Ganax. Ganax I paired with Far Traveler for a little while, but this was my attempt at Boros Blink stuff, which is still something I'm kind of interested in. I really like the idea of Boros Blink, although I think that there's a new Duskmourn commander that's kind of after some of the same stuff, like repeating ETB effects in Boros colors. There's some really good ETB effects. I found a new way to place that lately, but I was trying Duke Older and Ganax for a while, and they were both okay. They were both all right, but they're not the kind of things that I think were powerful, and they're not the kind of things I necessarily recommend to other players. Yeah, I think Duke, I might go D for Duke, just because like the myriad of it and blinking stuff and getting those ETB effects from there, it was cool as an idea, but why is Duke 6 mana? And once it gets down to a one-on-one, it's just like, yo, y'all hamstrung this one really. There are some good Boros commanders in that set. Duke, unfortunately, just didn't end up necessarily being one of them. Ganax with Far Traveler was also pretty decent, but I think I was just barking up the wrong tree. Here's the thing, though. Obviously, I like that idea. I like Blink Boros stuff a lot. And eventually, that became my SCOA deck, which is just silly. Like, I'm mono-red, trying to make a whole bunch of stuff over and over again. So I didn't give up on that as a concept, but it wasn't right. This was not the version, either of these were not the version that needed to take. And I tried it in a different area, which I'll get to a little bit later. That'll be, I won't tease it, but there were other ways that I visited that I think were a bit more fruitful than those were. And those were, yeah, cool, but just weird. And hard to avoid making it combo with Blink. Blink can really easily get into combo stuff. You had to be careful and navigate around that. It's just like, that was not the form that those things should have taken. Okay, now we're on to Thantis. Thantis was bad. Before they had done Goad in Commander, Thantis was trying to make everyone attack, but they could still attack you. But if they did, Thantis would get bigger, but at 6 mana, and it was weird. It was in a landfall deck along with Gyruss, who cared about graveyards. Confusing 2017 nonsense going on there. I can't say I look back on this fondly. This might be another D tier. Yeah, I should have gotten rid of Thantis sooner than I did. I'm not mad that I tried it, and very clearly Goad stuff was something I was really interested in later on, but yeah, Thantis wasn't good for me, and I wasn't good for it. I've seen interesting stuff done with Thantis with those colors, but it's not the kind of thing that I was... Yeah, I'm much happier with the version of Forced Combat deck that I have now with my Karazakar deck. It feels a lot more organic, it feels a lot more true, and it doesn't feel like it has to jump through quite so many hoops to get such a weird payoff that still has these restrictions. It was just, it wasn't a good time. Okay, these two, Graven and Mortarion. I know I sometimes pronounce Graven weird. Sorry, maybe it's a regional thing, I know. Holy crap, I love these. Yeah, I've got to put Graven into S, because this is my favorite archetype that I still don't have a deck for, and I miss him. I actively miss Graven constantly. Like, losing your own life to pump up your stuff is another version of sacrificing your own creatures to do cool stuff. I love that form that Magic takes. That's my favorite thing ever, is like, how can I hurt me, but it hurts you instead? Oh, it makes my heart smile. It makes me want to sing. I love that strategy. The reason I took Graven apart was because it was really good at thundering down one opponent and they would be knocked out, and then I couldn't necessarily close out the rest of the game, so then the game would go on for a really long time and that person would be sitting there doing nothing for at least half an hour, and I felt so guilty about that. But hot dang, I am so happy with the idea that Graven was playing with, and it was such an interesting, cool, like, sacrifice your own greed. It's doing all the stuff that I wanted to, but I couldn't justify playing it because of the experience that it caused other people to have. But man, I miss it. It's like, if there's any chance that I can recreate this type of thing, I'm still actively looking for it. There are other commanders in here that were also trying to evoke my, can I lose my own life to make my opponents suffer type of strategy that I clearly love so much. And Graven was my favorite version of that execution. I wish I had it, but I can't justify putting it back together. But if there's any chance that I can build something like it again in the future, I'm actively trying to. If you're saying, Joey, have you considered the Rowan, the red-black Rowan? Yes, I have. She has the same problem. She's so broken that it's almost a non-game. Like, so that doesn't quite scratch the itch. But I have considered it, I have tried it, but she's so good at it that I'm just like, oh, I can't. This is still not quite it. I want something that is doing that strategy, but not dominating the game with it in almost like a combo-esque kind of way. So I'm still looking for exactly that perfect thing, and I just haven't found it yet. I tried to find it with Mortarion, which I kept for a little while afterwards, which is a little bit more tempered because it was mono black. It had a little bit more of a restriction on it, and it was still trying to do that thing where you harm yourself just a teeny little bit, and then you get a big benefit out of it. Goodness, was it slow. Goodness, was it slow. Am I putting this in F tier? No, I'm putting this in D tier. It was so... Because again, I love the concept, but like I'll put respect on the concept with the Graven version, but like Mortarion, I was kidding myself. This is just like, oh, it doesn't have the Graven problem. Well, yeah, it has different problems, Joe. Like, you didn't need to keep this. Like, it was nice to try. It was okay. I guess, but like you were kidding yourself. This is not the type of game that you really wanted to play. And if you want to try that concept, it needs to take a different form. And unfortunately, this wasn't it for me. I don't mean it disrespect on Materion necessarily. I think there are weird issues with like necessarily like how that design can go. And it's like expensive, I guess, this kind of thing. I'm just like, y'all, this is a lot of mana. And then you have to pay even more mana to get the zombie, whatever SRD zombie benefit from it. Like, it's cool. I'm enchanted by it, but it just, I need to find an outlet for my life loss stuff, but Mortarion was definitely not good for me. Okay, then we have this. This was so stupid. Illyrio's. This was a dumb idea. This was more of a meme than it ever was a dream. Illyrio's, I'm putting into F tier because it was such a meme deck. The idea was to make a whole bunch of non-legendary copies of Illyrio's and just make it an all mirrors deck, because Illyrio's is the Theros version of Narcissus, where he's just obsessed with his own reflection. And I thought that was funny, and I just wanted to have as many Illyrio's as possible. But it was stupid. Like, the more Illyrio's there are, the worse the deck is. And even if I did like put it all together and I actually got something going, like, yeah, it was funny, but it wasn't doing anything in a game. And when people are actually trying to play and you're just like kind of being a little bit silly, it wasn't right. It wasn't right. So yeah, that's going into F tier. Even though, as a meme, it is funny. A meme can be funny without needing to be a deck. And so it is kind of like, why did I waste money on this? What are you doing, Joey? Una. Okay, Una was also pretty early on in Commander for me. It was very related to the stuff that I did with Geth and with Drana, where I was trying to make a whole bunch of mana and put it into something somewhere. Una can be cool. Una can be very, very powerful, especially with infinite mana outlets. It's like, whoa, that's a very powerful effect indeed. But I can't put it necessarily into F tier where Geth was, but it was obviously not the kind of thing that I was after. Getting all of those fairy tokens, for me, I was even like, what am I doing this for? Like, if I want to get a reward for doing stuff with my opponent's library, I want to like do the Regzeal thing and like steal their spells. I want to take the stuff from their graveyard and do something with it. And the payoff just being a bunch of fairy tokens, it wasn't right for me. So yeah, I shouldn't have like dabbled with it as much as I did. I can't say that it's an F tier because I outright regret it, but I learned pretty quick that like this is not the form that needs to take. So that's going to be a pretty easy D tier. Then we have Sir Eleonora, which was a mono blue attempt at Voltron stuff. It eventually became my Eligith deck, or maybe vice versa. I actually can't. I flopped back and forth between them, flip-flopped back and forth between them a couple of times, because it's interesting. I like the idea of like, I have so many cards in my hand that is what shall be lethal to my opponents. And there's still something to that I really want to try to capture. Sir Eleonora having a little bit of like, I guess an early version of Ward was also kind of interesting as well. Even if you can just like save her from removal by blinking her and then she draws you another card, I thought was really, really cute. I think that she's actually very, very powerful. Or like has the potential to be very, very powerful in that regard. There's a cuteness there that like every so often I look at her and I'm just like, oof. I would love to try that again. I would really love to try that kind of thing again, but it just never quite got there. I do kind of want to put this pretty high. Like, I don't think I can put it into B tier because it wasn't powerful, but I can't say that it made a nothing impression either, you know? Well, okay, so you'll also see that Eligith is here in my list, and so that might be how I kind of rationalize this. Sir Eleonora was more of a neutral experience, neutral impression than Eligith. Eligith I'll have more positive things to say about later, even though I did, you know, ultimately take him apart too. Like the idea, I still love. I love the idea of I have so many cards in my hand that will be your downfall. Eleonora was maybe not the correct execution of it though, and it obviously took a couple of other transformations as well, and it's the kind of concept I may return to, but well, I guess since I'm talking about it, all right, let me just jump ahead to Eligith as well. Eligith I'm going to put into some type of S tier, whether it takes the form of something Sir Eleonora-ish or Eligith-ish. I know I'm kind of jumping ahead, sorry, I'm cheating on my own tier list here. I know that he was farther behind, but like, I just love that idea of I'm using an Imperial Armor or some such effect to kill you just because I have 20 cards in my hand. Like, I think that's so neat. That's such a neat idea. And Eligith facilitated that a little bit better than Sir Eleonora did. Eleonora just benefited from that. Eligith, though, was again slow. It had that issue of just like, man, these games are taking a while. And when all of my investment is in my commander needs to be in play, that also encouraged me to play a bunch of counter spells to protect him, which made, unfortunately, deck feel a little bit more like a control deck. And when you draw that many cards, everyone's eyes are on you, so you got to defend yourself even more. So it just like, it accidentally became less of an aggro deck than I wanted it to be. So I still want to find some type of outlet for I punch you with my brain as a deck concept, which is why I'm going to put Elegith up here. Something about that enchants me so much that I know I'm going to return to it again in the future. I just don't know what form that will take, and I appreciate Eleonora and Elegith for helping me learn that lesson, even though I still need to figure out exactly where it's going to land. So that's where those are going. Okay, Bruce. Bruce is here, kind of as an ode back to what Graven and what Mortarion were doing, but he's going into F, not because Bruce Tarl is bad. Bruce Tarl is actually probably one of the cooler partners that they originally made in 2016. What I was pairing Bruce with, this is actually a stand-in, if I could have two images packed into one here, it would be Bruce and Ikra Shidiki. I was trying to use those 4 colors to do weird life trickery stuff. I wanted to be like weird life gain options here because that was going to try and be my engine for other lose life things like a Graven. It was going to be a deck that had Axis of Mortality and Graven and Willow Dusk and all of those types of effects, and, you know, Mortarion, like a whole bunch of them. I wanted to pack all of the, and Alicia, Sanguine Tribune, a bunch of those things that care about losing your life to get benefit. I wanted to put them all into one deck, and it was a dumb idea and it didn't work. So that is why it's going into F tier. Like, what was I thinking? Like, I still obviously love the play with life gain deck idea a lot, but that was a super bad execution of it. I think that other people could probably make it work, but I definitely couldn't. So it's disappointing. Bruce as a commander though, and Ikra Shidiki as commanders, those are cool, but it's just like the way that I was trying to construct them. It was dumb. Like, I ain't proud of that. It didn't work. Then there's Zada, which I had for a very brief amount of time. So brief that I don't think I can even put it into D tier. But it was truly just Zada Storm. And well, why did I do that? I think that Zada's also going like, I didn't enjoy it. I played a couple of games with it, and I did not like it. I was just, the entire chess clock was just me, and then the game was over. And so I played it once, and I was like, well, I'll try it. And then I played it again, and I was like, this sucked. It's powerful. So if you're playing in the metas where that's the, like, then hell yeah, go for it. And for that reason, I'd almost put it into the B tier where I've got like, oh, these are things like the power I've respected. But here, it's just, that's not what I'm after. There are things that I like about a Storm strategy, and you'll even see like other Stormy kind of commanders later on the list that I enjoyed more. And I think that's probably why I deviated into Zada to like try and see, but yeah, I just don't think there was a way that felt truly like a deck that I should have. So I think that I wasted my money on it, and that's kind of why it would. That's what my F tier is. It's just like I don't think I made myself a better player by trying this out. Even though plenty of players can do really cool stuff with Zada, and I think Zada's an interesting design. I really do. I think Zada's actually a very cool mono red design. But I didn't need to try that out. It was wrong for me. Okay, so Marisol I also look back on pretty negatively. And it's not because I think the design is bad. I actually really like the way that Marisol is designed, but I don't like the deck that I ended up crafting around those abilities. Like, it's tempered out, but you're still trying to find almost like, can I still make a combo even with the restrictions that Marisol has? But the abilities are unique. I actually really enjoy the design of this. I just couldn't make it work in a way that I ever felt satisfied with, and that didn't feel like just a little gratuitous or a little bit annoying, maybe? It felt like it was, again, kind of falling into that I'm spinning my wheels to do a little bit, well, like, I'm spinning my wheels a lot for just a little bit of value. And that's not the kind of gameplay that I necessarily enjoy. So it was an interesting experiment, but I don't look back on that experiment necessarily with a lot of grace. Not grace. I'm not excited about it. I'm not even necessarily neutral about it. I think I do look back there and I'm just like, yeah, I didn't need to have that for as long as I did. I didn't need to try so hard to make it work. The games may have eventually become interesting. A couple of them that I played were kind of like, okay, cool. I think this is what I'm after. But enough of them were not what I was after that I just like, I probably should have moved on faster than I did when it came to Marisol. And I feel the same way about Savine, unfortunately. Oh, I almost feel worse about Savine. Savine was my attempt to try and do graveyard stuff but with spells. Basically, it was going to be like an all Mizzix's Mastery type of deck, like mill myself out and then just play a whole thing, and like there were a couple of flashback things that Savine would, you know, help out with. And the reason I did it, like I was actually, when it came to the 2019 precons, which are certainly not my favorite versions of the precons they've ever made, I was very unimpressed by the whatever they call them, the biodome of those 4 precons against each other. Kadena, Savine, Girid, and Anya Falconwrath. The Anya Falconwrath deck especially was just like kind of a like the win conditions in each of those decks were pretty few and far between. Girid deck was the only one that felt to me like it had within that precon environment, I want to specify, that had like a lot of forward momentum. And Savine deck was clearly a control deck. I played that precon bod when the 2019 decks came out. I was in Vegas when those came out. I played those games. I played probably 6 games. Each one of them was at least 90 minutes long. And I won every single one of them with my Savine deck, which is why I then tried to be like, all right, can I translate this into an actual like deck, not just the Savine precon that I had and won all those games in that biodome with, but like moving away from just those precons against each other, can I put that into a different experience? Can I build a Savine deck that I feel compelled by as regular commander? Because clearly I had so much success with this. Clearly maybe I'm good, but I think it just was those precons I don't think were balanced well against each other. They produced very lengthy games. They didn't have a whole lot of win conditions in them, and Savine flourished in a deck that was a little bit slower because it was the control deck, and so it was able to outpace or at least like sustain enough to take control of that game. But it still took forever to eventually do that. So I tried it as a regular deck. That's a lot of backstory for this, and I'm not pleased with it. I don't think I'm... If F tier is, why did I even build this in the first place? I don't feel that way about Savine, but I'm not happy that I tried so hard to make it something, so I think that's going to go into D tier. I don't have neutral experiences with it. I am a little bit like, I look back on it and I do groan or sigh a little bit. So that'll give it the D tier treatment. But it doesn't make me facepalm. But even today, I don't think I'd be able to put together a Savine deck that activates what I want to activate. There are other like ways that I still want to explore Spellslinger graveyard strategies in the future, because I love all things graveyard, and I would love to not just do creature stuff with, the graveyards. I want to try other things too. And Savine was a first attempt at that, but it was a wrong attempt at that. I think it will probably, you might see me do Spellslinger stuff that has a lot of graveyard activity in the future, but it certainly isn't going to be inspired by stuff that Savine taught me, because I think it was just, again, another example of like, I was kind of barking up the wrong tree a little bit here. Talrand was super early in my commander career and super not fun. That's just straight up F tier right there. I did the classic thing of all counterspell Talrand deck. Just like, all right, I counter that threatening thing and here's a Drake. I counter that threatening thing and here's a Drake. It was boring. It was slow. No one liked it, including me. Easy F. Then there's Tawnos. Tawnos was cute. Tawnos was cool. I wish he was a little bit better, but I also am glad he's not broken, because like it's so easy to break artifacts. And so I like Tawnos a lot, but the deck did a whole lot of nothing. Like a lot of nothing. So I think that's going to end up being a pretty neutral experience with Tawnos. Like I wanted to try out not just the other artifact stuff with that precon, the Saheeli precon that came out. A lot of people were building Brutacloud at that time. I don't want to try the one that everyone was overlooking, but it turns out people aren't necessarily wrong to have overlooked Tawnos, because it takes a lot for him to do much of anything when there are so many other things that the artifacts can do already on their own. But he's a clever piece of design. I like him. I love the stuff that, like, how clever certain artifact things can be, and he asks you to approach that from a different angle, but it didn't do a whole lot. So it's just very like, okay, yeah, I tried it. It was a deck that I had. And if I do artifact stuff in the future, it probably won't take that type of form. Ineaz. This one, I'm not going to lie, I am cheating a little bit to have it on the list, because this technically was my mom's deck before Kengi came out, and my mom turned her flying deck into Kengi. Eventually, my mom has also turned her Kengi deck into Erranton Giada, which is a little bit more like, okay, I'm actually finding some flyers to play rather than just pumping them all up. And there are a lot of other pump effects that are in the 99 of that deck. Ineaz, however, was our first attempt at all of that. And the reason I'm putting it in here is because I also tried on my own, even when we, like, as a family, kind of tired of Ineaz. It's just like, this is not delivering what my mom wants a flying deck to deliver. I still tried making it work just for myself. Like, can I make this thing happen? Because Ineaz can pump up flyers, and that's interesting, but she also has this weird rotating effect of, like, if I attack with enough stuff, I'll make everyone trade things. And you can trade away negative cards, or like cards that you don't care about, like they've already done their effect and you don't care about having your Grasp of Fate on your side of the field anymore necessarily. You can trade them away and get a benefit of someone else's stuff. And even so, the amount of attention that Ineaz drew to yourself because people are afraid of you, like, ripping their commanders away, for example, it's just too much to deal with. And the fact that you can't even control which direction Ineaz is going, like it's always going to definitely be one specific direction, there's enough about Ineas that was frustrating that it was kind of like, man. So like I have a, I don't know if it's an F tier necessarily, because like we needed to learn some of those things to help guide where my mom's flying deck eventually became. But in terms of my experience with it, I probably should have just given up on it. Maybe that is F tier actually. Like once my family learned the lesson, I shouldn't have kept trying. That is F tier. Yeah, we're much happier with the flying deck that we have now within the family. My mom crushes with it constantly. It's really, really good. But Ineas, we learned as a family, we learned quickly, and I didn't need to keep trying to force something to work there. That wasn't a healthy amount of deck building for me. I didn't learn anything of value from that necessarily, other than, look, here's yet another strategy that I'm playing that will make a lot of people pay more attention to me than my deck can necessarily handle. And I already have plenty of decks that are drawing a lot of attention to myself, so I didn't need to keep bothering with that. Speaking of which, here's Kaervek. Talk about a commander that will draw a lot of attention to yourself. Every time other people do stuff, you can throw damage around. Kaervek is nutty. Kaervek also, I think, is better suited in my playstyle within a deck rather than at the helm of a deck, because lordy does Kaervek draw a lot of attention to itself. I don't think the experiences I had with Kaervek were negative, though. Like, it was alright, it was fine, but like, this definitely was the kind of thing that taught me about how much of a sword of Damocles a commander can be within a game. But it's not the kind of thing that I look back and I'm just like, oh, I'm glad I had that. I look back at it and I'm just like, yeah, that's exactly what the experience was, so that's gonna land it. Alongside Tawnos right there with the C tier of just like, yeah, okay, I did try it out. I think I gave it a good old college try, but it's not the kind of thing that I'm dying to build again, and it's not the kind of thing I regret either. Then there is Yannick and Nikara, which I think, let's see, I've had my +1 counters deck, which is Rayhan or Nishai. I've had that for like ever since 2016. Everyone was building Atraxa, but I was just like, I want Rayhan to move my counters around. And that's been a tough deck to balance necessarily, because +1 counter stuff with what Rayhan can move them to, there are certain targets that Rayhan can move all those counters onto that is just like, yo, this is wildly powerful. Like, way too good sometimes. That deck can be very, very powerful. But there's an odd dance of it that, like, with 4 colors, your deck can pull in so many different directions that every so often I've gone back to my +1 counters deck and I've looked and I'm like, what would it look like if I took one of these colors out? Maybe I tried a Sultai deck, maybe I try a +1 Abzan deck, you know? And so for a while, Nikara and Yannick was my experiment with that. I'm like, here's another type of thing that cares about counters, but in slightly different colors. Can I try this out? It wasn't right for me. I think it's actually probably underrated. I actually think they're very, very clever. They're very interesting. The blink effect that Yannick has is also pretty cool. So I like them a lot as a commander idea. But the reason that I was going into them was a wrong-headed reason. Like, I just should have stuck with my Rayhan. And every time I've tried tinkering with that deck to be like, oh, is there something different I want to do here? I keep on coming back to like, no, I actually really like the Ishai gathers all the counters and Rayhan moves them around. That is the thing that I like. I love putting those counters onto a pinata. The pinata explodes, you know, a hooded Hydra or whatever. I love that gather, redistribute, emergency backup, emergency button that you've got with those. It's a great strategy. I just get frustrated with a 4-color deck having so many things you could put into it that it feels like a hard deck to tune up. So I was looking for an excuse to remove a color. I tried out Yannick and Nikara as a result of that. That's the wrong reason to approach that deck. If you're going to build that deck, honor the commanders of that deck. And I wasn't doing that with these. So I don't regret it necessarily. I think there's a lesson there that it did teach me pretty darn well. But as a deck, I'm just like, it made a neutral impression on me because I was approaching it from the wrong reasons. And if I were to try and approach Nikara and Yannick again today, I think it would end up looking like a very different experience. So I'm just gonna throw them into a C tier there as well, because I was wrong-headed in the way that I went into that experience. I was doing it wrong, but I don't think that's a reflection on what that deck and what those commanders are capable of. So no disrespect on them, but I was in the wrong place for it. Okay, then we have Teysa, who absolutely has to go into B tier because Teysa is good. I was actually, this was one of my first attempts at black-white tokens before Thalys came out. I was trying this out. I nominally put together a Regna and Krav list as well that I never actually played a proper game with, but I was trying out Teysa because Teysa doesn't just double your death triggers, Teysa also gives your tokens vigilance and lifelink, and I wanted to be like, all right, cool, tokens, and then people will think it's Teysa aristocrats, but really it's going to be Teysa tokens, and I'll have a little bit of extra vigilance, lifelink, cool stuff from the commander there. And that was all right. It. The thing is, everyone assumes that Teysa's going to be death stuff, and there are enough afterlife cards that make tokens when they die and make so many tokens. Like, there are enough death triggers, one of them, Hallowed Spirit Keeper or Spirit Bonder, I think it maybe, like, enough cards that still have death triggers that make good tokens that I was still running, that I couldn't separate myself from the classic aristocrats feeling that Teysa naturally invokes. So she was still doing a little bit of that. Even I could never fully get away from the aristocratic roots that she's really there to do. So I like her. If anything, I think she's almost too good. Like she's great. She's powerful. But I liked trying it out, and I like the idea of Teysa tokens, which I think actually Matt, my co-host Matt, now has a Teysa tokens deck as well. Like, it's interesting, it's cool, and she's powerful. Even if you're not trying to do the most powerful version of her, she's still great. So I look back on it and I'm like, oh yeah, that was kind of a nice experiment. I liked trying to use this commander in a slightly different way. It didn't work out, and when Thalise came out, I was so happy for that to be our preview card, because I've been wanting so desperately to have black-white tokens, and Thalise really scratched that itch in a way that Teysa never did. But I'm just like, you know what, Teysa, if Thalise hadn't come out, I probably still would have tinkered with that for a much longer time, and so let's honor Teysa for the cool stuff that she's up to. Okay, then there is, what is it? Grusilda is her name, an uncommander. Silver bordered, doing basically Mimeoplasm stuff, but in Rakdos colors. This, I don't know, I wanted to try it out. It's kind of an unofficial thing. Obviously, it was silver bordered. Make sure that you check with the group before that kind of thing, but people were game for it. You could put together some really wild stuff. Like, I would try to pair up, like, Spike Shot Elder, which can deal damage equal to its power. I'd try to pair that up, combine it, squash them together with Grusilda's ability, pair that up with Infinity Elemental. I was just trying to do stupid stuff like that. It was a cute time. It was fun while I had it. I do look back on it fondly. Wow, I'm smiling more than I thought I would. I'm going to... All right, this might be controversial. This might be controversial. I'm going to put this in A. I'm going to put this in A tier because it's silver border. Silver border stuff is not everyone's cup of tea, and throughout a lot of my commander experience, it's not my cup of tea either. But I think it's good for you. I think that you will learn a lot if you do allow yourself to try it. There are a lot of folks who are frustrated that it's just like, yo, I want to try out these silver border cards, but my playgroup or strangers are not necessarily into it. I understand why you're not into it. There are a lot of silver border cards that have a pretty messed up effect on commander games, and you have to catch me in the right mood for a silver border game some of the time. I get why that can be frustrating for people to regularly encounter, but I also get why it might be frustrating to experience them. Like, there's a silliness there that, like, sometimes we do want to take the game and approach the game on its original terms, So, like, I understand that. But in terms of, like, did Grusilda make me better at commander? Yeah, I think she did. Like, addressing the silliness while still trying to break the silliness, like, it was a mind-bending type of experience, and it does, when you key into, like, the stuff that silver border was there to do as well, like, when you honor what that part of the game is also there to try and establish, like, fully not unhinged. Unstable, the one with the contraptions, that limited environment, one of my top 5 limited environments. It's so much fun. It's great. It's a really good draft environment. I really, really like it. It's up there with, like, cons for me in terms of, like, this was a really great time. You do have to be in the right mood for it. And when you have an uncommander, sometimes that's the case. A buddy of mine has a Baron Von Count deck, and honestly, I love it. It's so cool. It's a lot, like, there are plenty of examples of silver border stuff that you're just like, you know what? This is cool. I didn't realize that. So, like, you gotta give yourself a little bit of a chance. There's a possibility that I'll return to something silly silver border again in the future, but not this. Certainly not this, so I'm not gonna put this S tier, but I do think it's healthy to give yourself permission to try out the weirder stuff that you don't usually allow yourself to look at. And for that reason, might be controversial, but I'm going to give Grusilda here an A because I'm just like, you know what? Try out something that you don't think that you'll like. Turns out you might. Turns out you might learn something. And in my case, I definitely think that I did. Okay, then we have 2 Kindred decks here. We've got Abomination of Llanowar and Anawan. Where do I put these? This is interesting. Abomination of Llanowar, I'm going to put into B tier. You know what? I'm going to put both of them into B tier. I liked these a lot. Those were fun experiences. And I don't think there's any possibility that I'm putting them together again, but there is a possibility that, like, like I've got a lot of the pieces of both of these decks left over, and they're the kinds of decks that I would build for someone else. Like, I like the Elf Ball, the Abomination deck, a lot, because it's not the kind of thing that it's not the kind of Elf Ball thing that we're used to in the like it's literally a ball of elves, but the Elf Ball strategy we're all used to is like so much mana production, so ridiculous that like it overpowers a game. Abomination of Llanowar did not inherently risk that in the way that like Lathril decks can, and I think Abomination was really overshadowed by Lathril, who is dumb levels of powerful. But Abomination gives you a really cool, like, all right, here are all my elves that I just dumped into play from my hand, and if they die, which they probably will, because people need to clear the board before those elves can truly go haywire, even if they die, you still have a backup in the command zone. It's not a proactive part of the strategy, it's a backup plan in the command zone, and that was really, really cool. And the concept is neat. I think it like it allows you to access a neat creature type in a way that isn't going to steamroll every single thing, and it gives you an out that isn't just like, oh, one board wipe and my game is completely over. Like a lot of those Kindred decks totally can. If you don't have protection to keep the board alive, then sometimes it's just like, oh, I'm SOL. The game is totally over for me. A lot of decks can, especially aggro decks, can fall into that camp, and that's definitely a weakness of an Elf Ball strategy. Abomination of Llanowar is a little more tempered, and it has a backup plan ready for you, and I love that idea. So I look back on it definitely very fondly. It was quite powerful. Man, I'm almost talking myself into an A with that. Yeah, I'm talking myself into an A with Abomination, because it is the kind of thing I would recommend to other players, and I literally said that I would build this for another player. Like, this is the kind of deck that if someone is trying to get into the game, that's probably the kind of thing I might build for them. It's cool, it's interesting, it's fun, it's doing graveyard stuff, and frankly, I think we're going to put Anawan up there too, because Anawan did what I wanted my Rexiel deck to do all that time ago. And I played it for a long time. Folks who were regulars on the twitch.tv/EDHRecast, and we were streaming, during the time when everyone was stuck at home and stuff, we were streaming a lot, and I played a lot of Anawan. I really, really liked it. Eventually, I took it apart because I was doing a couple of other things with several of those cards. I wanted some of them to be accessible for other decks of mine. But like, I never thought that I would enjoy rogues as a strategy. I was just like, oh, whatever, rogues. I don't usually care about creature types. I don't usually care about Voltron either. But they really impressed me. The Anawan deck, it was neat. It was like, I think the way that a lot of people have built it, they lean maybe a little bit too much into mill. But in terms of decks that I learned a lot from, Anawan was up there because it plays a little bit with the graveyard, but not a lot. And it still needs to balance how much do I care about an opponent's graveyard with how much do I care about my own creatures. So you know what, I gotta put them up there. Gotta give it up to them. They taught me a lot. Those are really cool approaches. If there were going to be any decks that I did build around a specific creature type, I'm glad it was those. I'm glad that I did those, and frankly, they're the kind of decks that I could probably see again in the future, because I still have a lot of those pieces, and if I run into a lot of people, I like teaching people how to play Commander, I run into a lot of people who want to learn. These are the kind of decks that I would give them to help them access it. So these are decks that I'm very, very, they make me smile. They make me smile a lot. Speaking of decks that I've given to other people, that is the case for my Shalai deck. Well, what used to be my Shalai deck. I had this for a little while. I was trying to do some Selesnya stuff, a little bit of +1 counters with her activated ability, sure, but it's really just about protecting your stuff because of the hexproof that she gives you, and it was just classic Selesnya stomp your stuff. Like, I liked it enough. I liked it okay. It was alright. I was learning pretty quick that, like, Selesnya is not my speed, but I was trying to expand my horizons. It was okay, but actually it eventually became my older brother's deck as he was starting to get interested. My younger brother plays a whole bunch. My older brother, he was like, maybe I'll try it out. Do you have anything? And so I handed him Shalai, and it seems like he really enjoys it. So I'm really glad to see that. But I could tell that it wasn't working for me. So I'm gonna put this into C tier because I'm glad I don't have it anymore, but not because I regret it. I'm glad it was a part of my Commander history, but the reason I'm glad I don't have it anymore is because I'm glad that someone else has it now. It's a good way for someone to learn something that they did like. And my older brother, turns out, loves Selesnya Stompy, which was really, really cool. And it was a neat approach. Another Commander that I think probably gets a little bit overlooked by some other much more obvious value engines, but just like, don't mess with me and my stuff, and also my stuff can get bigger if you don't, answer my stuff eventually. Like, Shalay's a pretty solid Commander, and I'm glad that this is in someone else's hands now. It seems to be better served over there. So it was a perfectly pleasant, very normal part of my Commander history, but it's a better part of someone else's now. So a little bit of fondness there for Shalai. Ooh, okay, then we have Chainer, Mono Black Chainer. This was a thing that I experimented with when I was eventually realizing I wanted to move away from Marin. and that was a wrong decision to try Chainer when I'm moving away from Marin, because the reason I was moving away from Marin was because I didn't want to have an experience where I just revive the same thing over and over again. Problem being, Chainer's really good with just, cool, I use my activated ability on Chainer to revive that creature from the graveyard, sacrifice it, and then bring it back, sacrifice, and then bring it back. Just, you loop a Kokosho or Grey Merchant of Asphodel over and over again. So I tried moving from Marin to Chainer, tried out mono black stuff. I did not get what I was looking for. I got the exact same problem because I'm addicted to that value. That said, Chainer's bonkers powerful. Like, I love it. And frankly, if there's a world in which like maybe my Conrad deck almost could have been Chainer for a little while. But like it's so good that I'm like, that goes into B tier. I didn't need to spend my time on it, but like it didn't cost me anything either. I already had all of those pieces together. And so like I was barking up the wrong tree probably, which is kind of like where the D tier and F tier is. But with the experience that it's able to produce, if that is the kind of thing that you're after, and let's be honest, looping a Kokosho, I did it enough with Marin that like, I'm not mad about that idea. It was more about like looping the removal over and over again was really where I started to grate with Marin, because that was more detractive to a game rather than like I'm finishing this. Whereas like with Chainer, it didn't quite have that danger because you're not as often looping removal spells so much as I was more frequently looping win conditions. And so I don't feel like a sense of regret necessarily with that. I just feel like this was powerful. I didn't need to be doing it, and so there's a reason I took it apart, but it was powerful. It was doing a lot of death stuff very, very well. Okay, then there's Keurig, who I feel nearly the same way about, if I'm being honest. Keurig was yet another version of what I was trying to do with Graven. Like, lose my life for a benefit. I stayed away from Keurig for a long, long time because I knew he was busted. I knew he was broken. I had Keurig for exactly one game. I played Keurig one time, and it was awful. It was so obnoxiously good. The other players might as well not have been there. It was basically just me playing solitaire, you know, and I'm just like, that's not what I was after. That makes it hard to say D tier necessarily, because D is like, I kept it too long is kind of the way I describe that tier. F though, F is a, why did I even build this in the first place? Does Keurig deserve to be an F? It does. Like, I wrote down my version of like, what does SAB mean? And like, B isn't just like, oh, it's powerful. B is also like, do I look back on it fondly? And even if I didn't keep some of these, and even if they were too good, even Chainer, I'm kind of like, like, you know, it's kind of like, yeah, like, this is powerful. It was just like, and sometimes it was fun to be there. Sometimes there's like a glee attached with like, I shouldn't be allowed to do this. Keurig didn't make me feel that way. Keurig made me feel embarrassed in the same way that Yidris made me feel embarrassed. And I knew that that was going to be the case. I knew that that would happen while I was tinkering with it. And I think I just wanted to kind of prove to myself, but is this right that like, as I'm building it, it feels like this might truly be the case in a real game? Like, maybe I'm kidding myself, but like, I knew what I was going to find at the end of that tunnel, and that's exactly what I did find. And there's no way that I'm looking back on this. The concept of like paying my own life to cause other stuff to happen to my opponents, that's big, but that's exactly what some of these other commanders were here for. And Keurig, as a result of it, is just like, I should have known better. By the time that I eventually went from that to this, like I should have known what was going to happen. And so I tried rationalizing it, but that wasn't helpful. That wasn't fruitful. And if I could go back in time and say, Joey, you know what's going to happen here, I think a past version of me would have benefited from hearing that. So yeah, like this is an issue of being too powerful, right? Like there's kind of a weird disparity. Like I said, I'm not ranking any of these by their power. Some of these up at the top are not the most powerful things. This is one of the more powerful decks that I did build, but I just didn't enjoy it because of the situation that I found myself in as a result of it, where I was just like, I'm not enjoying this. This is bringing me no joy because I'm not getting any challenge associated with this. It's a hollow sense of victory. Like, okay, congratulations, you built it, you did it, Joe. We did it, Joe. But no, it wasn't right. It was not a thing that I needed to pursue the way that I did. Okay, then we have Phylath. Phylath is another one that I would like in terms of like stuff that I think is overlooked. I think Omnath as a commander is so good and so famous that it really overshadows how also good Phylath is. I think people read like, oh, you only care about basic lands with Phylath, and they miss how amazing Phylath's ability actually. This is an Avenger of Zendikar in the command zone that also adds at least 4+1 counters to one of your things that you can then fling at people. Like, I loved playing Phylath. And I eventually took the pieces and turned them into what became my cousin's Omnath deck. But like, Phylath is Phylath going on A? B or A. Like, I really enjoyed this, and I enjoyed how overlooked I think a lot of people I think looked at Phylath and they're like, yeah, but Omnath, and it's like, no, Phylath slaps. This thing, it's a totally different tempo too, because Omnath you have to play and then start playing lands to get your board. Phylath you play and immediately have a board. Like, it's really hard to penetrate through that wall of blockers that it creates. And then you do a couple of land things, and then suddenly you've got at least a 12 power creature in play. And it's like, cool, slap an Embercleave on that, slap a Chandra's Ignition on, like, to one of those things, and you do a little bit of counter doubling. Phylath is amazing, y'all. Phylath is great. Phylath is way my type of tempo when it comes to Gruul landfall. I gotta put it high up there. Phylath is A. Phylath is A because let the lesson for this one be, don't let the famous things cause you to overlook the other stuff in sort of that category that could be good too, because Phylath is fantastic. Phylath is S. There's a chance that I put Phylath back together again. As I'm talking about it, I miss it. Phylath is S. This is an S tier commander for me in terms of like decks that I miss. If I didn't use those pieces to eventually help build a deck for my cousin, for someone else, I could easily have kept that deck for a little bit longer. I don't play it that actively, but in terms of like just raw landfall stuff, not like land graveyard stuff, which I'm doing with several of my other decks like Titania and Babala Saga, in terms of like raw landfall things, Phylath is the type of game that I'm after. Phylath is S. There's a chance I might put that deck back together again. I'm kind of talking myself into it. We'll see. Okay, then we've got Cardor, which was originally one of the decks that I had. Like, there was the Thantis stuff that I tried. Obviously didn't keep that for very long. And then I had Cardor. Cardor became my Karazakar deck, which is so much better. So much better for me, because what Cardor was doing was ticking off a lot of people. Karazakar is better in terms of like producing the type of gameplay that I wanted from Goad, but what I did with Cardor was Cardor Planeswalkers. This was another attempt at Planeswalkers for me, and Cardor was too good at that. See, the thing about Cardor, the thing about Goad in general, is that when you are goading or using Cardor's effect, which is a little bit like minorly different than Goad, but effectively pretty similar, using that type of forced combat on them, they're worded in such a way that those creatures forces creatures to not be able to hit Planeswalkers. They have to hit an opponent of yours if able, which means they're not allowed to attack a Planeswalker, even an opponent's Planeswalker. So when I built Cardor, it was Cardor Planeswalkers because, haha, you can't hit my Liliana Dreadhorde General. Like, haha, you can't attack my Chandra. So my Planeswalkers just get to tick up and up and up and up and up. So this was just me playing Cardor, sacrificing Cardor, and recasting it, or using a Malakir Rebirth type of effect to re-trigger that effect over and over again, so my opponents were forced to attack each other and not me, and especially not my Planeswalkers, which meant that they were safe to tick up to ultimates that would just bum everyone out. Cardor was too good. I played a couple of games against people, and I did this really silly thing where I drew a Cardor on an Infinite token and put that on the field to remind people, hey, gotta attack each other. It was miserable. And I think I learned pretty quickly that, like, man, people don't like this. And also, again, it has that issue of like, all right, cool, a Planeswalker has ulted, but that doesn't mean the game is over. How are you actually closing this stuff down? So the game, this was a control deck, and it was too good. And I'm so happy that it's now a Karazakar deck instead, which is tempered out a little bit better. Like, it's still controlling things a little bit, but it's not quite the aggravator. Like, playing against Cardor was miserable for other people, because it's just like, all right, cool. Like, I guess we can't hit your Planeswalkers in their ult. Like, it wasn't great for people. So like, Cardor, I'm gonna respect like how this led me to the deck that I have now. It was very, very good, and in terms of the creativity, I still think it was kind of funny. So I'll put it up into the B tier in terms of like, yeah, kind of a guilty smile associated with this, but it inspired me to, it helped me learn what actually I wanted to do with a Goad deck. But yeah, the Planeswalkers approach with Cardor was like, whew, that was That was sinfully good. I shouldn't have been allowed to do it first for that. But I did take it apart pretty quickly once another option became available and once I saw the effect that it had on other people in the game. Okay, Rune. Rune specifically, there's a qualifier that needs to happen here, which, I completely forgot to mention. My Graven deck, I also tried out with a companion here too. Rune specifically, I didn't have ever just an original Rune deck. I had a Rune and Karuga deck, which I called Karunga because I'm dumb. So this was only ever Rune without access to a bunch of, I think, like 1 and 2 drops. I think Karuga's companion affair is that he has to have at least like 3 mana cost stuff and higher. And so my approaches with Rune were only ever that version. And speaking of companions, I forgot to mention earlier, I did try Graven with an Obosh companion for a little while as well, which was okay. Didn't really color my impression. I went back and forth on whether I liked it or not. Rune, I tried with Karuga. It was okay. I think it made exactly neutral of an impression on me. It was like, yep, that sure was a thing that I tried. I think it was good. And I didn't necessarily miss having the early ramp either entirely. But like, in terms of the stuff that I wanted from a Blink deck, what I learned from Rune is that I don't enjoy Blink in those colors. I really wanted Blink to be somewhere accessible to red because I like red's damage output. I like Warstorm Surge stuff associated with Blink colors. So Rune was like, all right, cool. I learned a little bit from this and it made some interesting experiences, and it certainly could be very powerful, but it wasn't the kind of thing that I enjoy necessarily. And I want Blink to have a little bit more literal firepower, like literally fire in its power. So Rune with Karuga, I was like, all right, cool. That was nice. That was a nice little try, but I'm going to move on to something else from there. Then we have Tasha. Tasha is so disappointing. I'm like, my entire family is super bummed about this. The reason that we built Tasha was because my mom, who also plays Commander, her name is Tasha. She loves to play a whole lot of Azorius and flying stuff, but when a Commander came out named Tasha, we had to give it a try. The thing about Tasha is that this is a very awkward design in terms of Commander. It rewards you for casting spells that you don't own, so stealing spells from your opponents, and it can take those spells from your opponent's graveyard and eventually cast them. The hoops that you have to jump through with this. First of all, it's a Planeswalker Commander, so it's very, very attackable. So you have to set some amount of stuff in your deck to defend it. Second of all, it wants you to have a bunch of cards that steal spells from your opponents, a bunch of those Gonti effects, Night Veil Spectre, stuff like that, which is at odds a little tiny bit with the types of spells that will mill your opponents, which your opponents need to have enough of a graveyard by the time that Tasha eventually arrives for you to snag a spell from out of their graveyard. So you have to do some steely stuff, and you have to fill up their graveyard. And then eventually, after all of that, you'll start to get some 3/3s. And you have to pay extra mana on top of that for a lot of the other spells that your stuff is casting. Like, it's so much effort to get even one 3/3, and to keep her alive throughout all of that. Very much a control deck if you want this to happen. Because the other problem is that when you're taking your opponent's spells and you're putting all of their stuff onto your board, there's not a high chance that all of those spells are going to cooperate with each other. If you've got an artifact deck and an elf deck and a tokens deck or whatever, they're not all necessarily going to gel really well. So it has a lot of the same issues that a lot of those other I steal from you type of decks have. And on top of that, it needs to care about defense and it needs to care about graveyards. And as a result of that, we were disappointed. And yeah, eventually the conclusion that we kind of came to as a family was that, like, oh yeah, we'll keep this because it's cute. Mom has this is Tasha's Tasha deck. And she was just like, I'm going to play my flyers. I just want to hit people. Like, she was like, why would I take someone else's spells when I can just play my own? So my mom didn't care for the Tasha deck. And I tried making it work after that, and then I didn't care for the Tasha deck either. So I'm not like in full regret mode, but I think it is like, it's not like facepalm, why did we ever build this in the first place? There's a cuteness there. There's a neat idea. And I've seen people who can make Tasha work, but even then, I still think that it produces really long games because of how much control it needs to have in order to produce the effects that it wants to produce. But yeah, I'm a little bit disappointed by the design of Tasha compared to what I've seen some of the other Baldur's Gate Planeswalker designs be, like Minsc and Boo kind of stuff is just like, whoa, this is way cool. And Tasha's a lot more convoluted. I think convoluted is the way to phrase it. So we fought a lot. We fought really hard to make Tasha work, and I just ultimately don't think it was right for us. And so that's why I'm gonna put it in here. I really wanted it to happen, but it wasn't right for us. Lae'zel I paired with Master Chef, and this is yet another Selesnya deck that I built for myself. tried it on around a bit, and then actually eventually gave it to someone else. This is now my ex-boyfriend. When he was getting back into Magic, he was kind of interested, and I gave this one to him, and from what I can tell, he seems to really enjoy it. Lae'zel, amplifying the amount of +1 counters that Master Chef will distribute to all of your creatures, means you get a pretty beefy board pretty dang quickly, and a lot of like mana dorky kind of effects will give you even more mana for how big those creatures are, which is very, very cool. Very straightforward Selesnya stuff, simple +1 counters things. This was a nice experiment. I would almost put it, like, do I put this in B tier? It's between C and B. I think I'm gonna put this into B tier just because I'm like, the background, the experience of like building around a background is something that I'm still tinkering with. There are a lot of commanders that I'm still playing with that I haven't fully given up on, which is why they're not in here, that I still want to do more stuff with backgrounds. And I think it's a good idea to try building around background commanders because it's a slightly different experience than the typical thing. And so even though like I didn't end up necessarily wanting to keep this, I'm glad that I did it. And I'm glad also that like this was another moment that I needed to do for my career, my commander career, of like, I needed to break out of my usual colors. Like I play a lot of black, you guys. You've probably seen my deck list. Everything's linked in the description. I play so much black because it's my favorite. Like the self-sacrifice that it does to get huge benefits. It's a tempo of gameplay that I can just never get enough of. But I need to remind myself how the other half lives sometimes, you know? And that's what Lae'zel was for me with Master Chef for a while. And that was a healthy reminder to be like, yeah, there's a lot of power that exists in a style of gameplay that I just very rarely engage with. And you should remind yourself to engage with that a little bit more often. So even though this now belongs to someone else, I'm glad that I tried it. And I think that it's healthy to have tried it. Yeah, so I won't necessarily quite slide it up into A tier because in terms of like what I learned from it, I'm just like, this was just a good deck. It wasn't like a crazy powerful deck, but it was just a good deck. So it didn't teach me like huge lessons about the game itself, but it did help kind of recalibrate my brain about what it is that I appreciate about the game and what I can learn to appreciate about other colors that I don't usually play. Sisay was a 5-color Shrines deck, which I think a lot of people had built around that time. That 5-color big Sanctum of All Shrine came out, and I wanted an excuse to play that because I had a whole bunch of Shrines. I was looking for a place to use them, and this seemed like as good as an excuse as any, so I built a Shrines deck, and it was exactly what a Shrines deck is. And then eventually, later on, Goshintai came out, and now that's exactly what Shrine decks are, and Goshintai has kind of dominated the Shrine space. So Sisay's fallen off a little bit with Shrines, but I did try out Shrines before we got there. And it was exactly a Shrines deck. This is, as you can probably tell from my tone, I'm putting this right into a C tier because it's like, yep, that's what that deck was. And Shrines, you know, there's plenty that they can do. There's a lot about them that is very enjoyable. I think for a lot of people who have been playing Goshintai, they've kind of been like, oh, yep, this took all of the creativity out of it because this is just, it does exactly what it says on the tin. There are a lot of people I've talked to who've been a little bit frustrated by Goshintai, but like I had that frustration with Sisay because she just tutors them for you. And that was kind of like, all right, well, my gameplay is like very straightforward. My gameplay is just like planned out for me because the commander will find me the things that I need in the order. Like here, I found out what the exact order is. So like, I don't have as much experience with Goshintai. I can't speak to the experience. I've just heard from a lot of people who are a little exhausted by how efficient Goshintai is. Whereas for me, I was exhausted by how straightforward Sisay is. And I honestly don't think that I'll go back to Shrines again. Like, I'm glad I tried it. I'm glad I got that out of my system a little bit, maybe. But this isn't a thing that I regret. But it's also another thing that I'm just like, oh, yay. It's just like exactly, you know, cool. That's exactly what it was. And it was there. That is a part of my history, I guess. I almost forgot that I had built it. Moving now to Rayanya. This one was the predecessor to my now Skoa deck, which is my mono red, just like enter, do some damage, that I'm blinking or making a bunch of copies of Skoa to just do a bunch of damage, even though the copies won't stick around. Rayanya was the original version of that, and Rayanya was too good. Like, she was quite good. She drew a lot of attention to herself, but I still love her design. Like, even if my version was too good, I think that it was a very clever place to take a mono red commander to do stuff that we know mono red can do. It fuses this interesting, like, get good ETB effects, but also have a little bit of Spellslinger, like just a skosh of that in there. It rewards you on both of those axes. Rayanya was cool, and obviously I'm very attached to the idea. I was talking about Boros Blink. Eventually Boros Blink became what Rayanya was, and those ones obviously didn't work out for me, which is why I think I put them a little bit lower. Where did I? Yeah, they landed down here in D tier. I was trying to do some Boros cool Enter the Battlefield stuff. eventually I realized like what I want to do is just something that benefits a lot from Warstorm Surge kind of effects, or like just make a bunch of copies of a Terror of the Peaks, and that's exactly what Rayanya was. So for that level, for that reason, I'm gonna put her on the B level, because I'm just like, this is, yeah, you know, that was a pretty decent time, but the novelty did eventually fade, not in a way that made me, you know, upset. I'm just like, oh, it did eventually kind of go away, and that has now turned into the Skoa deck, which I am a lot happier with because it's so goofy. You made a common commander, Skoa cares about Grandeur, right? But like the fact that that deck shouldn't exist and yet I still can do that type of stuff with it is kind of interesting to me. And I think it's such a weird flipping of that, where like so much of my history with this red blink damage effect was to have stuff like Duke Older or Rayanya or Far Traveler with Ganax. In like there was an engine in the command zone to produce the blinking, and it really, what I had the most fun with was the spells that do the blinking, or the spells that make the extra copies in the 99, and then the commander can just be like, I'm the target, and so that's why I've enjoyed Skoa a little bit more. But Rayanya is totally respectable. Like, what a clever little idea. What an interesting dynamic way to make it, even if you are making a bunch of copies, even if she can be crazy explosive. She's also tempered out in a way that allows you to still just get value if you need. I respect the design a lot, so I'm gonna put her into a nice B tier, because I'm just like, hey, you know what? That makes me grin. That makes me, I'm just like, I look back on it, I'm just like, yeah, that was kind of a neat deck, wasn't it? And that's exactly what a B tier should feel like. Zephi, meanwhile, Zephi, I played the Strixhaven precons against each other a couple of times, and I was so impressed. So, like, that biodome of the precons against each other is very, very cool. Probably some of the most fun that I've had. Like, shout out to you, Glenn, and Lenny, and Steven, if y'all remember the games we played with those, like, so much fun to play those against each other, because they were so swingy and wild. And the Zephi deck in particular was like, everyone was so obsessed with Veyran, the secondary commander in the Zephi precon, but Zephi can also, like, it. Who cares about hitting that 10 mana thing? If you just play a 5 mana storm spell, you're gonna make so many 4/4s. Like, that deck is crazy. It's capable of some crazy stuff, even from within the original precon box. Because this is a storm deck, and storm's good. I think ultimately I've got to put Zephi just straight up into a C tier. Like, it was a good deck, but it didn't excite me. It was a much more approachable version of what I know storm decks can do, and it was fun to experiment with that. And it was fun to see also that it was like kind of capped in a way that storm decks usually aren't, because it was producing a bunch of creatures in play, as opposed to like winning the game with the storm stuff, which a lot of storm decks will just like, boom, this is like the game winning turn. But like, I'm not like, oh, this was so great. It was more like, okay, cool, here's a different type of thing I did with Storm, and that's exactly still what it was. I would almost say that like that type of thing, that of just like, I'm taking a whole bunch of game actions, what can I do with them, is like healthy to try out, even though it again is like taking up so much of the chess clock that you start to be like, oh, like, whoa, okay, you guys, like, I'm sorry everyone, like, it can kind of have that effect, but it didn't have like so much of that like, and now I win kind of thing that makes me think of it negatively necessarily. It was a new way of approaching Storm, and I'm glad that I tinkered with it for the time that I did. But I'm not kind of like, oh, that was great either, if that makes any sense. Like, it was, yeah, I'm kind of waffling on a lot here for a deck that clearly didn't have a huge amount of effect on me. So Zephi Thunder Conductor, or Zephi Thunder Collector, whichever one. I know on your own card you were a little bit mixed up about which one you were. Yeah, it just, C for the Conduct Elector, I guess, is where we're falling. Feather is going to be next. Feather, I had for so long. I had for years. I loved her. She's one of my favorite characters in the lore. I'm glad that they did her card justice. But man, I just, over time, every turn that you play in a game when Feather is your commander, every turn looks exactly the same. Every single one, just like that. And these are exactly the spells I'm going to play to get exactly the benefit that you know I'm going to get. It's hard to interact with her once you have like a protection spell or two. It's just like you can never remove her from the board, so it's very powerful. But like, it just, the sameness, like, so many of the decks that I play nowadays, Babala Saga, Barakos, like, they're a little bit of a puzzle every turn. How can I get the types that I need in order to make the deck do what I want it to do? Whereas Feather was like, the same spell that I cast on turn 4 is the same spell that I cast on turn 9, you know? Which isn't a dig at her necessarily, but it is the reason that I eventually fell off of wanting to play her more and more, and she really fell strongly to the bottom of my list, and eventually I realized I haven't played you in over a year. You're just a paperweight at this point. I gotta just take it apart. But my heart still breaks for it. I don't think I'm ever gonna put her back together again, but I really like the stuff that she taught me, because I wasn't just doing commander damage stuff with her, you know, and there were plenty of things. So I was just like buff, here's a double strike effect and I can kill with her for commander damage. But I also was able to do stuff with Aria of Flame and Aetherflux Reservoir. And those were weird and fun to try and tinker around and balance. And so I'll put her into A tier. I think I learned a lot from the experience of playing her, and she was quite good. But just, you've really got to be prepared for exactly the experience that she's going to give you, because exactly the experience she's going to give you is exactly the experience she's going to give you, not just every time, but also every turn. So you really got to be prepared for that. But like, yeah, I'll give her that high grade because like, I do miss her. I'm not going to put her together again, but I do miss her. I feel for it. And the fact that she made so many like common combat tricks, really powerful cards, is also just such a huge kudos to her design to like make cards that don't matter in any other deck become bombs in her deck. You gotta give it up for that, right? Like that's such a cool way to like access. That's why we're here to play Commander. So respect on her name. Feather A tier. Okay, coming up next here, we've got a trio of Golgari decks that all were sharing sort of the same shell for a little while. I had a Rutstein deck for the longest, but I also had tried out basically that same shell with Old Stick Fingers and with Izoni eventually. And I didn't end up keeping any of them. And frankly, actually, I'm going to go ahead and scooch over Amzu here because Amzu was kind of related to this a little bit too. Little bit different, but I'm just getting all these Golgari experiments that I tried. I'm gonna tackle them all right now. Amzu was probably one of the more interesting ones, and I think I didn't give Amzu a fair shake, if I'm being perfectly honest. Amzu is a cool way of like removing stuff from your graveyard and getting a benefit for that. I still think is very, very cool. Honestly, I don't think I gave Amzu enough time, and so I may eventually try to revisit it. But I wasn't able to access it the way that I want to either, so I can't say, oh, it was powerful, because I don't think that I was able to do. So give me a very neutral impression, but I still think that there's something there that I may eventually try to access. I'm going to put Amzu, as much as I want to put A for Amzu, I think I'm going to give Amzu the C tier, because it was like, this wasn't what I needed right now. Maybe it will be in the future, but I'm not like gunning to like go right back to it very, very soon. Whereas the other ones, where do y'all go? So Izoni was wrong for me. Izoni is a cool piece of work, and in fact I think an underrated commander. Like the sacrificing tokens to get that benefit, I actually think is very, very cool, but there have been so many other things that play around in that same effect now. I mean, Izoni's a Grave Titan in the command zone. Like doing the collecting evidence, that's easy. But getting the full benefit from the commander was a little bit awkward. I don't regret it at all though. I'm not like sad that I had it, but again, it was just another one of those commanders where I'm like, this isn't exactly what I'm looking for right now. It was hard to figure out exactly what I was looking for, and that's what Izoni and Amzu both kind of represent. I'm going to put both of them into C tier because there was something there. There was something there with them, but they didn't make enough of an impression on me to be like, ah, and they also didn't make enough of an impression on me to be like, oh. I think that's the best way I can say that. There's something about both of those that I am curious to continue to explore, but they're not calling to me in the way that, you know, like Audric is like calling to me, or Martin Stromgold is calling to me, but like, put me back together. I'm just like, oh, I miss this. There's something about removing stuff from your own graveyard to get benefits that aren't just I put it back into play that I still may want to explore, but we'll see. I'll have to get there in my own time because I was not prepared for it at the time that those things were presented to me. Then there's the old Rutstein and the old Stick Fingers. Very old. I've moved to Honest Rutstein as an Aristocrats deck right now, and I also, of course, have Sir Conrad, and both of those care about sacrificing a bunch of creatures and filling up your graveyard, and obviously that's what these were after as well. I was trying to make some type of Mortal Kombat deck work, and in fact, if you want to see my old Rutstein deck. I played it on an Elder Dragon Hijinks, and I was trying to just fill up my graveyard and have a big graveyard be exactly exactly the thing. Like just having a big graveyard caused a Lord of Extinction or a Mortivore to be super crazy huge, and therefore that would be the thing that wins me the game, right? And that's a cool concept that I still like. I love that. Like stuff with criminal past as well is the kind of thing that I am intrigued by, because it's an aspect of graveyarding that I don't have completely represented in some of my other graveyard decks. It's another way of exploring graveyards that I'm trying to play with, because I obviously can't get enough of them. But honestly, these were only all right. I think I'm gonna end up putting them into D tier. Like Rutstein slowly filling the graveyard was a nice, steady little engine, but it was only okay. And Stick Fingers filling up the graveyard and being a payoff. I actually think some very, very powerful decks are capable. Like Brian Kibler has a Stick Fingers deck that is real good, and that's kind of what inspired me to try these out. But they weren't the things that I was after. So like, there's a little bit more of what the Golgari, Amzu, and Izoni stuff could do for me, as opposed to what these two could do for me. There's something there that I'll eventually craft into stuff, but I have so many other Golgari situations going on in my life that I didn't need to focus on these quite as heavily as I did. So that's kind of why I'm going to give them pretty middling grades overall. Then we have the Cult of Skaro, which I'm also going to put into a D tier, because I was approaching this wrong. I think the Cult of Skaro is really cool, actually. I like that randomness of like when they do their stuff, when they attack, you're going to get some random effects out of that. That's actually is neat. I'm very intrigued by it. There are a lot of Doctor Who designs that I think are like, whoa, okay, what an interesting, how would you, like, they inspire a little bit of that creativity in me. But the stuff I was trying to do with Skaro was I was trying to make like as many copies of this as I could. And that's only an okay way to do it. It didn't really honor what the deck is truly about. And I think I was kind of approaching this deck not from the way that deck wanted to be approached. And if I were to do more artifact stuff with any of those cards, like, because there's a lot of interesting artifact creature beatdown stuff available from the Doctor Who decks that I am curious to eventually explore a little bit more, but I was doing it in the wrong way, and making clones in this way, it was wrong-footed. It wasn't the approach that sang to my soul necessarily. So I tried it. I tried it for longer than I needed to. So I'm going to put it down into D, because it made kind of like I think I kind of wasted my time here. Let me move away from this for a little while, and eventually I'll reapproach it and I'll find a different tactic. And I actually think that like eventually I did, and that became my my historic deck, my 6th Doctor with Sarah Jane, where like that's kind of scratching my artifact itch right now, because I'm just making a bunch of things that care about how many artifacts I have, and they get more powerful for that. And so that's kind of where I've landed, but maybe I'll find a little bit more of those mean artifacts, like Dimir kind of artifact stuff in the future. I doubt that it will have anything to do with what I was trying to do with all those clones. I don't think that was the right approach. Okay, final 3. Tolsimir. Tolsimir is going exactly into C. Tolsimir. Ignore me. Yeah, this was a deck that I made for an Elder Dragon Hijinks episode. It was nice to practice with some wolf stuff. It was cute. It was a fun time. I liked it. Voya, I was playing with Voya, but not that one. And it was all right. But it was like, I'm not sad about it. It was fun to do that episode, but it's not the kind of deck that I could keep paying attention to. Like, here's wolf stuff, but also kind of like it was okay. It certainly wasn't my speed, but I'm glad that I made it, and I'm glad I had it for the time that I did. And I don't even know that I would necessarily be like, oh, you gotta try this either. So like, it's cool. C tier, perfectly fine. But then Tyvar the Bellicose. Buddy. Tyvar is S tier? Tyvar, are you an S tier? Be honest with me. Tyvar is S tier. S tier is where I'm putting Tyvar. This was a deck that I made another video about called Completed Then Yeeted, where I built Tyvar because I was like, this is so neat. And then after one game, I got every experience that I wanted from the deck, and I'm like, well, shoot. And so eventually I still have the pieces of this deck as a thing that like another player can try, because like it's a cool thing. And so like maybe in someone else's hands, like it's like a great way, like no one else has a deck to play, I can give them Tyvar. That's kind of the function it fills right now. But like I look at it and I'm just like, buddy, like can I have you back? Because like those things that when you tap them for mana, they get more counters because of Tyvar, and then therefore they will tap for even more mana on a future turn. That's the kind of design that just makes my brain go haywire. I'm just like, this is so neat. I gotta keep playing with this. I love this idea. The design is so enchanting to me that I think that it's probably inevitable that I'll try and make this work again. And that's what S tier is. S tier is just like, there's some version of this is going to exist again in my Commander future. I want to play around with power and mana and that relationship of them feeding into each other. There's an exponential growth rate there that I just think is too fascinating for me not to pay more attention to. So that is going to be where I'll put Tyvar into S tier. And then the most recent one, the latest deck that I've built and taken apart, a little bit of a cheat. Maybe cheating's the wrong way to say it. I was tinkering around with Mr. Foxglove because I love him. I like him a lot. And this has eventually become a deck that I actually passed on to somebody else as well. So I'm glad that I won't leave it, but like, you know, I won't never see it again is maybe how I should say it. But I like it. I just like, I was again, sort of like I was doing with Lae'zel. I was trying to find a deck that would allow me to flex outside of the usual colors that I play in, and Mr. Foxglove is just straightforward beats. It's either cheat a cool creature into play or draw a bunch of cards. It just feels honest. I don't know if I can say it. I'm just like, play all my stuff, redraw a hand, cool. Or play a bunch of free stuff. Like, this just feels like exactly what I would want either a Selesnya or in this case a Bant deck to do. Of just like, here's the beats. I'm just gonna pummel the game. I'm just gonna like straightforwardly like just steadily lay out threats. Do you have answers? And if I run out of threats, my commander can still get me back into the game, but not in an obnoxious way, in a way that scales to whatever you're still up to. I love Mr. Foxglove, and it's the kind of deck that even though I've given it to somebody else, I could see myself playing a deck like this in the future. I don't know if I can put it into S tier, but I will put it, let's say I'll put it into A tier, because it's the kind of deck that I do recommend to others. I think if you want to play creature beatdowns, this is exactly the style that really sings to the soul, that will make people happy. And that's exactly why I gave it to somebody else. And it's the kind of deck that makes me smile. It's the kind of deck that makes them smile. This is the kind of commander that I am excited to play against and maybe to play with. So like, I may not build it again in the future, but man, I hope people do. Because like, this is the thing that even makes me, a person who doesn't play straightforward aggro strategies. I play a lot of sinister graveyard stuff. That's a commander that even makes me want to do more straightforward aggro stuff, play more honest Magic. That says a lot. That's a really cool thing, and that's the type of experience to have with commanders like these, where they make you branch out in ways that you aren't necessarily used to, and that's what A tier means. That's solid. Dang, here's my list, huh? Doing one last look over, are there any things that I would change here now that it's all in one big group? I mean, these are absolutely I think that these belong. I could really see myself putting together any of these again. These are the kind of, like, I think that Abomination's great. Marin was obviously, it was huge. These were annoying. Like, these were exactly okay experience. I could almost see like moving Eleonora up, but that's again, that's kind of what Elegith is there. Like, Elegith is one, they're kind of like balancing each other out a little bit here. And that's kind of the case for a lot of these. A lot of these are decks that I took apart and then they became a different deck in this list. So I have different emotions about how each of these commanders approached those different strategies. Like, there's a core here of stuff I want to do. I want to do stuff with lands. I want to do stuff with artifacts. I want to do stuff with a little bit of politics. I want to do stuff with blinking. Like, a lot of these landfall, you know, or different kindred types or whatever. Like, a lot of these emerge in multiple ways along this list, and I've learned a lot from each of those different experiences. I've learned that there are ones that I super don't want, and then there are approaches that I love a whole lot. And so yeah, it's never, one single strategy is never going to be in exactly one tier. One single strategy can manifest in so many different ways in this amazing game that if you try it out enough, you may find exactly what it is that you're looking for. And then maybe that's my final lesson when I'm looking over a whole bunch of these, is that several of these commanders led me to the lessons that caused me to love the actual decks that I currently own and that I currently keep, that led me to love those and keep those for as long as I have and love them as much as I do. So thank you to all of these decks I no longer have. You've taught me a whole lot. Whew, that was a lot. Wanted to wrap up with some final thoughts. First, going over my old deck history was very nostalgic. I enjoyed that. I also definitely spotted some patterns amongst the decks that I had at one point committed to building but then eventually backed away from, such as, for instance, the bad habit of several of them producing very samey turns over and over again, or several of them also had that bad habit of like taking up a lot of the chess clock without having a hugely compelling payoff. That's helpful for me to keep in mind when I think about building another deck in the future. If I know that that's the kind of gameplay that I'm clearly very interested in, there's something about that style of gameplay that really attracts me to build a deck, but it's the kind of thing that doesn't hold my interest over the long term. Something for me to keep in mind before I actually physically commit and pay money to building a deck if it's the kind of thing that I might eventually wane on later on. Second is the less obvious thing, which is what's absent from this list. The decks that I at one point thought about building, but never fully actually committed to making in paper. This tier list that I've just gone over and my current deck roster in no way cover my entire EDH career, because there are tons and tons of other decks that I've played or built that I just never personally kept for myself. And there are also literally over 100 other decks that I've brewed and playtested over and over and over and over and over again, but I never physically put them together in paper. So there's definitely a bias in terms of the types of decks that I actually do try out versus the types of decks that I ponder and brainstorm but never really commit to. Maybe that's the kind of thing that I can remind myself of, to branch out a little bit more in the future to make sure that I don't wind up with any EDH blind spots. And my third takeaway is how much just talking about those S tier decks really reinvigorated me. Like, I took all of these decks apart at some point, but many of those concepts eventually just evolved into new forms, and many of those still linger with me. Many of them are clearly the kind of thing that I enjoy and that I want to try again in one way or another. And the circumstances of when I took those decks apart might not be the same circumstances now. For several of those S tier decks, maybe Commander has changed enough that if I tried them again today, I'd be a lot happier with them. So keep a weather eye on the horizon, I suppose. Mayhaps you'll see some of these again after all. That's it from me. Remember to hit those YouTube buttons and to comment below about which of your old decks that you would rank in which of these tiers. I really do want to see if there are any decks that people have in common, if certain commanders get ranked similarly. And if we get enough info there, it might be something that we can make a follow-up video about. It sounds really exciting to me. So cheers, thanks again for watching, and as always, remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.